with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Cristina Beltran, author of Cruelty As Citizenship, How Migrant Suffering Sustains White Democracy. Also on the program today, wildfires rage in the West as nature is trying to tell us something. Meanwhile, in Washington, the bipartisan infrastructure deal on the verge of collapse. Same may be true of the Olympics in Japan as COVID spreads among the athletes. Polling shows American unvaccinated largely unmovable. New report, DOJ declined to prosecute Wilbur Ross despite 5 separate referrals. Question now is, where is Merrick Garland? Federal judge says Indiana University can require students to get COVID vaccinations to return to campus. And Ben & Jerry's to stop selling ice cream in occupied territories. Meanwhile, in Peru, Pedro Castillo declared president. And lastly, Jeff Bezos figures out how to spend a tiny fraction of his money by taking a ride in a rocket ship. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Emma Vigeland joins me as well, as always. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam.
So, folks, today we should say it's a little bit sad for us here today. We're trying to, make it sort of a somewhat joyful celebration. A year ago on this day, the host of the Michael Brooks Show, former contributor, a contributor on this show, co-host of this program, producer of this program, Michael Brooks passed away a year ago on this day. And in the second half of the program, we're going to dedicate to just reminiscing about Michael and remembering him. He was many different things, I think, to many different people, obviously. But he provided a lot of fun on this program and great insight. We'll go through all of this and his trajectory in the second half of the program. But he worked on the show from 2012, I guess, to 2020, 8 years. It's the longest single work relationship of my lifetime. And certainly had the longest tenure on this program, aside from myself. And I don't think there's anybody who works on this show who doesn't think about him at least every day that we do the show. We still have many elements that have been produced that are interstitials that involve Michael. It would be hard to imagine them not. And of course, I think that's the same of the audience. in many respects. A lot of people watched Michael sort of almost grow up in some ways. He first came to the show in 2012 with the idea that he was just going to do it for a year. I think he had done an internship or at Talking Points Memo writing. And his original plan was going to do this for a year, and then he was going to go to, I think it was the LSE in London. And at one point I realized, like, he doesn't seem to be going. And he, his show, when he launched it, it was the second or third sort of project that he had launched, grew exponentially. It was the growth was huge. And he was a very unique voice in this space. And I think from my perspective, what I miss the most is the sort of the comedy and the fun that he created on this show. And so we're going to play one clip of him now. We may play other clips, and we're going to have some friends call in, and we're going to open up our phone lines to the audience to call in and give talk about some of their favorite moments or aspects of Michael's work. But this one I chose because I was just saying to these guys, we have done about 2,700 episodes of this iteration of the Majority Report. I had done, 4 or 5 years worth of shows on Air America Radio. But over the course of the 10 and a half years we've been doing this show, we're now at about 2,700 episodes. There may be a little bit more. And I can remember about 5 of those. And but the moments that I remember from this show were almost all 5 of them were moments of laughing, either with Michael or generating the laughs with Michael. Laughing, I want to say laughing and laughing at him. There was a couple of those times there, actually. But this moment happened back in 2013. So Michael had been with the show at this point by probably less than a year. And maybe it was about a year. And the other producer was Matt Binder. We were in a room that was about maybe about 200 square feet, 3 of us. It was not a pleasant office. It was in the fashion district of New York City, and it was very not fashionable. We had windows that overlooked a brick wall that we had to keep shut because of the soot. And we were right on top of each other, basically. And you'll see the tech on this clip is not, and I don't even think we were live. Except for audio at that point. But we did take video. We didn't have the ability to cut because we only had one camera. And before this moment, Michael and I must have talked about it. I didn't know that he really did impressions. I don't know that he ever anticipated using them on the show. But there was a clip of Rick Santorum, who I think this was in, I think this was in response to Mandela's death, but I'm not 100% sure. I believe it was. And Rick Santorum was on CNN comparing the Republican fight against the ACA to the long trajectory and fight of Nelson Mandela's life, which I hope is understandable, we found completely absurd. And so we started talking about this, and I think Michael must have said beforehand, like, I'll do a Mandela impersonation. And we probably said, like, yeah, you'll talk about how you're actually, like, conservative too. And This moment I always remember because it really did begin to shape the show in the way that I wanted. I had always hoped that the show would be, that would be able to integrate comedy, satire into, talking about the news, and never really contemplated it being about impressions, or specifically one about Nelson Mandela being a right-winger. But this is how that developed. There you have it, folks. Obamacare is like apartheid. Obamacare is like the repression, literal repression, of the majority of Americans. Americans under Obamacare, a vast majority of them, can't eat in the same restaurants, must live in slums, can't have access to the natural resources of their country, cannot have an equal vote, cannot have, that's what Obamacare is for Rick Santorum, because he's so stupid. Yeah, you want to do Mandela?
It was like in Santorum.
We hadn't quite worked out the smooth transition at this point, but go ahead.
And Mandela comes out and he's like, of all of the injustices in the world, that could remind me of the struggle against apartheid, the delivery of health care through a private market mechanism. None could face the same level of injustice and tyranny that Americans face by having an inconvenient website so that they are covered in a catastrophic situation. You should fight this.
Now, I want to know, when's Rick Santorum going to go into prison for 27 years to fight this? Unbelievable.
The names Santorum, Gingrich, and other heroes of the struggle against the slightly expanded Medicaid. You will go down in history along with Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and other great comrades who have fought evil injustice. How demented are these people?
So demented.
It's so much better if they could just say Mandela was a communist. Screw him.
Oh,
my God.
Right. So there it is. Longtime listeners of this program will be surprised that Michael ended that so quickly. And you can hear Matt Binder, old Matt, as we call him around here, in the background cackling. And we, there was the first time that we had done something like that to my memory. And it, obviously we got a little smoother with that stuff as we went along, and then the dynamic was less, Michael do more. It was like, okay, Michael, that's enough. But it really, it changed the trajectory of the show and made it personally just, I think obviously made it much more enjoyable for the audience. But
yeah, that sort of way of communicating became our main mode on the show and off,
yes,
in the office.
Yes, it sort of took over, and we'll talk more about this kind of stuff in the second half of the program. We're going to have some of Michael's friends call in, and Michael's sister will call into the program. And everybody will, reminisce and just remind themselves of Michael in their own way. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'll be talking to the Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Studies in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at New York University, author of Cruelty as Citizenship, How Migrant Suffering Sustains White Democracy. We'll be right back with Cristina Beltran after this. Hey, today's episode is brought to you by the new podcast from Chapo Trap House's Matt Chrisman and Chris Wade, Hell of Presidents. From Washington to Biden, Hell of Presidents is telling the history of the United States through the office of the presidency, in the irreverent Chapo Trap House style. Who are all these men? And why should you even really care? Listen to Hell of Presidents to find out. Hell of Presidents is available exclusively on Stitcher Premium. To sign up and to get a free month of listening, go to stitcherpremium.com/hell on your mobile or desktop browser. Click Start Free Trial, select a monthly plan, and enter the code HELL at stitcherpremium.com/hell. Promo code HELL. All right. Want to welcome to the program Associate Professor, Director of Graduate Studies in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at New York University, author of Cruelty as Citizenship, How Migrant Suffering Sustains White Democracy, Cristina Beltran. Cristina, thanks so much for joining us. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sam.
So, okay, let's start with, I guess, this concept of a project of whiteness, and how it is. What does that mean? Let's start with that.
Right. Well, I started this book because I was trying to make sense of why immigration, particularly from Latin America and Mexico, was such a site of such visceral hostility on the right, and why the fact that it was such an emotionally galvanizing issue, and why did migrants in particular seem to, create such passionate opposition for conservatives. And in thinking about that, I also wanted to think about what are the pleasures of violence as well, like the fact that people seem to be not only doing violence, but also kind of enjoying talking about and taking a certain kind of pleasure in talking about the fact that they were, putting up barbed wire fencing, children in cages. And so in trying to figure out what is the sort of center of this sort of hostility, I realized I had to think about whiteness as a political project. And so in the book, one thing I'm trying to talk about is I'm talking about whiteness not simply as a race. I'm not talking about just white people. I'm talking about people who are invested in a politics of whiteness as a political color, which means a politics that is embedded in a politics of domination, but not just a politics of domination, but a politics of domination in which one feels more free when creating inequality for others, that one's own sense of sovereignty or freedom or equality is centered on the idea that some people don't have access to that. And so for me, when you think about the United States, with the brief period of Reconstruction as this effort to kind of undo what scholars have sometimes referred to as white democracy, when we look sort of past that moment that was sort of a failed moment in this country, and then we don't really until 1964 and 65 do we have a country where we really have legal equality for people across racial difference. So it's a really embedded part of our history that, segregation, Chinese exclusion, Jim Crow, these things are really embedded in our politics. And so I was trying to make sense of how it isn't just like a bad prejudice thing, but really think about it as how has it affected our sense of democracy, our sense of freedom. And so that's kind of what prompted the book.
Well, talk about this concept of cruelty tied to civic identity, because I think that was such a, a well articulated phrase that fits into this concept of white democracy historically and in present day.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's one of those interesting issues. I was reading, a lot of different scholars, and one scholar who really struck me was Pierre Vandenberg had written a book where he used the term Herrenvolk democracy. And what struck me about that term is, Herrenvolk refers to the idea of the master race, and we know that from Nazi Germany and that logic. But what he says is he describes the term as democratic for the master race, but tyrannical for subordinate groups. And that really struck me is that, because one thing I think is that when you have these sort of forms of racial violence, they don't just feel like you're just being lawless. They actually feel like the rule of law, They feel like people feel like what they're doing is kind of practicing the rule of law for themselves. So it struck me as interesting that tyranny and liberalism could be conjoined in this particular way. But in thinking about that, what really struck me was, and I think we don't talk about this enough in our country, in our history, is that when we think about things like Jim Crow, we tend to think of that as I always think we think of those segregated, water fountains, One says colored, one says white, But the reality of Jim Crow and the reality of segregation was it was a deeply participatory act. Segregating people took a lot of effort and it took a lot of work. And so a lot of people were participants in creating segregated spaces, right? I mean, it was all the way from, bus drivers, waitresses, real estate. If you were a real estate, person who worked in real estate, if you were a usher at a movie theater. So one thing I really wanted to think about was how white supremacy and segregation created a lot of participation for a lot of people, and that actually made them feel like they had a certain kind of power to tell people where they could move, where they could sit, what spaces in public they could occupy, which swimming pools, which parks. And so when you think about it as a participatory, in some sense, democratic project for certain white citizens, then you realize that it also offered people a sense of their own power. It made them feel like they had something that somebody didn't have. And so when you start thinking about that kind of pleasure, you start realizing that that's a pleasure that, not only does it go to extra legal violence like lynchings or, the Tulsa riots, those sorts of moments of kind of lawless, engagement, but that on the very small ways, or not even, they're not small, but in these very daily ways, these very quotidian ways, there was a pleasure for some white citizens in creating segregated space, that it made them feel powerful, it made them feel like they had something. And so I wanted to think about the kind of regime of domination that could go from serving on an all-white jury all the way to lynching, to participating in a lynching, to reading about the lynching in the newspaper, that it really was something that was, unfortunately, we can characterize it as civic. It was a civic element of American life.
Well, I mean, that's fascinating because it's basically just sort of like, we're all invested in this civic project of just making sure that we suppress a specific population or a couple of specific populations. I mean, you start to really begin to understand the sort of like bizarre fetishization of the wall on some level that Donald Trump was, it's a big, beautiful wall. It's almost like it's a monument to we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Except for the people that we have specifically said are not in this with us, so that we have this ability to sort of join in the in-group. What is there? And I guess, and we can talk about like you begin to understand why it's so important to hang on to the notion of illegals as a term, right? Because what we're doing is an illegal civic structure. And the reason why we can do this is because they're illegals. And therefore, they're playing a role in this too. It's just that they're playing the illegals role. But this isn't innate to Americans, right? Like, I mean, this is you're talking about a human dynamic, not necessarily with all human beings, but with certain types of folks who want to feel like they're in a project, and part of their project is the subjugation of other people. Like, where else? I mean, I guess maybe as I'm saying it, I'm thinking of a couple of examples, but where else do we see something like this play out?
Right. No, and I think that's really, two things you said I think are so important, because one of them is that, yeah, certainly, when I cited Vandenberg, he talks about Brazil, Mexico, South Africa. So I wish we did have a better comparative analysis of racial difference, how racism functions, colonialism, how these legacies play out in different places. So that, you think of like James Baldwin writing about going to Paris and feeling free for the first time. And then he realizes he's in a cab with an Algerian cab driver, and he realizes, there's a legacy of difference and colonial practice here that doesn't touch me in the same way, but is certainly here as well. And you realize these are global phenomenon that we have to understand. And I think one of the ways we have to think about that is they have these connections and they have these similarities, but it really requires, I think, scholars and journalists to really dig down into the specific histories of particular places. So we might see these things happening in all kinds of places, but they do have very particular histories with particular communities, and you need to sort of understand that in order to maybe understand how to undo it. And so one of the things I was thinking a lot about was the fact that a lot of our discussion around race still kind of operates on a black-white binary, and we have to sort of think about these other populations and how do they fit into chattel slavery, white supremacy, because I think you have to understand those things, settler colonialism, indigenous dispossession. You have to understand that history to understand any other population and how they're being treated, because those set the terms of American life in so many ways. But I do think that one of the elements that I wanted to spend time on was looking at like the Mexican-American War and looking at the frontier. And when you think about the frontier as like a space in which Americans really conceived of themselves as engaging in a project where there was freedom through movement, right? And this idea that you could move across the land and claim space and make it your own. And you made it your own through the hard work of building those spaces and settling them and building, communities and schools and, civic organizations. But you also made it through displacing people, sometimes through enhancing and expanding slavery. But this idea that freedom and movement were so deeply tied, right? But our history of racism is often telling certain populations like Jim Crow, telling them where they couldn't move, where they can't be. And I think what's interesting about the undocumented is after 1965, you couldn't police. I mean, I think the policing practices in this country are one way we police the movements of Black people and brown people. But the policing of the movement of people wasn't as possible when it came after Jim Crow, after the demise of those legally in 1965 and 64. So I think what's interesting about the undocumented is they remain one of the few populations you can still invoke the language of law. You can still say they are illegal. You can invoke the rule of law to dominate them and to impose violence on them. And you can claim that you're doing it because you have to, because it's the law. And you can kind of, invoke legality to do violence. And I think that's for some citizens, that's a very seductive practice, that you can dress up and join a militia and literally round up people and be allowed to do that. Like, there's no other population. You can just go to some portion of the country and round them up and then call in, ICE or the police, and they will come and get them. Like, that whole practice has a very long history in our country, with the Texas Rangers, and there's a long history there that I try to write about in the book. But there is an interesting history of it made people feel like they were doing their civic duty, and there aren't a lot of populations you can treat that way. But because they're non-citizens, right, in a way that African Americans were once non-citizens in a particular way, now this population are non-citizens, and that creates a certain kind of opportunity structure for how to treat them.
And I imagine too this notion of mobility being sort of a birthright of citizenship, and then you have the mobility constraints lifted, at the end of Jim Crow, but you're doubling down on the idea that, like, we can't have them just roam across the border here, these illegals. That's that's the ultimate flaunting of the right of citizenship to constrain their mobility.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that's so interesting is we talk about, Jonathan Metzer's written about death by whiteness, and different scholars have written about the deaths of despair, and this sense for a certain segment of white citizens that the world is getting smaller, and they have a really dystopian, negative sense they have no sense of futurity, right? They sense that the future is only going to get worse. I think there's a scarcity logic of white supremacy, or sort of the politics of whiteness, where people feel like if they're not on top, somebody else is dominating them. Like, there's no logic of sharing, right? Like, I'm a political theorist by training, and I always think of Aristotle's definition of a citizen is someone who rules and is ruled in turn, right? It's about never being only ruled or only ruling. It's about always going back and forth with the practice of being ruled and ruled in turn. And it's about sharing power, right? And of course, for Aristotle, he didn't include all kinds of populations, so granted, but the idea that we share power, that we trade it back and forth, that the logic of America's earlier history, I think, makes certain white citizens feel like there is no sharing. It's either we're on top or you're on top. Either we dominate or we're dominated, right? So when you have that logic that is always sort of a scarcity logic, that only certain people are allowed to have something and we can't, I think this feeling that their lives are getting more and more constrained and narrow. And then on the other hand, they look at migrants and they see migrants doing, claiming their freedom through movement, and not necessarily, letting the law stop them. Like they ultimately say, I need to save my children, so I'm gonna cross this border. But the same way, not the same way, but with echoes of earlier forms of movement that maybe different populations felt they had access to. And these populations that are moving aren't trying to move to displace or dominate. But I think when you have a logic of displacement and domination that already circulates, when they see that kind of movement, that's the narrative that they attach to, right? And so it's interesting to see that the group that feels a sense of their own futurity, they're trying to fight for a future, that isn't inspiring, that is terrifying. And that's one of the problems we have.
And I guess part of that too is just this casting of Latino people specifically now in current modern day as anti-citizen, which you write about, or anti-citizenry. How does that concept evolve or get to this point? Because you know, of course there are differences internationally among different, you know, nations and ways the world is perceived, but this one seems particularly American.
Yeah, I think this idea that you know, there was a scholar named Judith Shklar who wrote about African Americans and characterized them as being like anti-citizens, in the sense that the very act of their claiming citizenship would somehow reduce or threaten the citizenship of white citizens, right? So it is that zero-sum logic that if this population has access to citizenship, this could actually render my citizenship less meaningful. And, you know, sometimes we even hear that now where, you know, someone like Tucker Carlson will say, you know, if they vote, my vote means nothing. Like they'll literally create that kind of anti-citizen, even if they're citizens, their citizenship is literally undoing my own citizenship, you know? And so I think that it does have this interesting long history that it doesn't assume, I think liberals often, we often assume, oh, you know, we can create this more expansive, inclusive logic. And I think we can. But I think what's interesting is we have to contend with certain segments of the American public that feel like it can't be expansive, that if it grows, they lose something, that somehow their membership gets watered down or threatened, as opposed to, you know, we actually can be in a politics where, you know, all of us have, you know, that if I have rights, if gay people, if trans people have rights, that doesn't mean rights are less, right? If some people can get married and they're gay, you know, and straight people can get married, it doesn't make your marriage less of a marriage, right? But there's a scarcity logic.
Let's talk about that, because I think that there is some reality to that scarcity of logic. I mean, I don't subscribe to it, and I think to some extent, like, okay, sorry, you know, I mean, it's like you're an only child, and then all of a sudden there's a second kid there. It's like, yeah, guess what? You're not the only child anymore. But like in the context of this zero sum, I mean, Tucker Carlson is right insofar as every time somebody turns 18, or every time an immigrant becomes a citizen, his vote, you know, at least as a mathematical, is, you know, infinitesimally, but actually is diminished, just like my vote and your vote is. And, you know, I mean, I've used this example ad nauseum on this program in terms of, you know, a white person seeing, a white male is seeing themselves not centered in everything in the way that it, you know, we were 30 or 40 years ago and before. And the idea of like, my traditions and favorite foods and my language just not as dominant and as central as it was before. So there is some loss there. I mean, my perspective on this is like, okay, well,
sorry,
but there is some loss there, right? I mean, this is not imaginary. It is real, and it is having this grasping onto that sort of centralization is not a terribly democratic impulse, it seems to me, but it is a real impulse, and it is like a material difference on some level.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think one thing that we have struggled to even talk about is that sense of loss, right? That sense of when one is always the center of everything, when there's no other, when there's no logic of sharing, right? And I think it's funny, your example at the beginning of like an only child, you know, getting a sibling, right? Like when you don't necessarily have a logic of sharing, right? And then you find out that you have to share, but then perhaps sharing, you also gain a playmate, like you gain other things. Your parents aren't like, I have 20% of love and now you get 10%, like, right? They, you know, that the connections and commitments grow and create new, you know, emotional formations, right? But you also do experience a loss. Like those, I think we don't know how to sort of reckon with the simultaneity of the fact that you can lose something and gain something, that something new can happen. I think like Heather McGhee's work in The Sum of Us is trying to kind of get at that, right? That you can lose something You can lose the pleasures of domination. You have to let go of certain, in some ways, I would characterize them as like tyrannical pleasures, right? You have to let go of, you do lose access to the right to dominate, right? I mean, when Me Too was happening and a lot of men were like, you can't even make jokes in the office anymore, and all these sensitive women, and you can't do this, and they're right? The way they operated in those spaces was changed, and there's a sense of, I don't get to be the person I was, right? But then there's also the possibility of being something else, having people, new ideas, having a new community, having other ways of being. But I do think that for certain people, right, the world does feel it's changing very rapidly, and they don't, I think, but I think it also creates this kind of, if you live within a logic of only losing, if you have I guess what I'm saying is, if you live in a binary logic where there's either a loss or a gain, and there's nothing, and instead of the kind of fluid fact that there'll be a different way of being in the world together, which is hard to talk about and not easy to discuss the same way it is to just say you're losing, you're winning, right? But if you're losing that, I think there is this feeling of like, I always laugh when there'll be a show and like the James Bond, franchise will say, maybe we'll have a woman Bond, and like, men are dead and there's no place for men. It's like, there's just one. There can be like 9 guys and 1 woman, and there's suddenly this feeling that they have nothing. It's all been taken from them. So I do think it reflects this idea that there hasn't been a logic of sharing. It's like, no, it doesn't mean, when people say the future is female, it doesn't mean it's only female. It means that sometimes Black women are going to be there. Sometimes white women, a whole bunch of us are going to be moving back and forth. You're going to have a seat at the table. You won't have all the seats. You'll have some chairs, not all the chairs. But I do agree with you. I think when you have had all the chairs, some chairs is fewer chairs, right? And you don't necessarily think, well, I'll get to talk to new people. There's going to be new ways of me feeling free, or me not having to carry the pressure of representation in these ways. Like, there's other things you get to maybe let go of that could make you feel breathe differently and better. But I don't think we've exactly articulated what that new world looks like. So it just feels like loss.
Yes, and that's my follow-up question is, like, what do you? I mean, it is one thing, and I'm certainly guilty of it, of just saying, like, suck it up. Sorry, you had a lot of privilege, you had a lot of control of things. You used to watch TV, and you were the focus of everything. It was, I mean, when I watched TV as a kid, it was like, it was either about me, or me as an older guy, or my mom, or my wife. That was, my future wife. I mean, that's basically what every TV show was. But what as a society, I mean, it's one thing, if you're my therapist and you're telling me, like, Sam, you just got to accept the fact that you're no longer centered in the same way. And there are other things that you can explore. Maybe you have less of a but as a political question, like, how does a society that is emancipating people and both from an economic and social standpoint, I guess you could argue from an economic standpoint, there's like, continuous growth, although that may be problematic for other reasons, as we see half the country on fire and half of Germany floating away or something to that effect. But how do you make that case, as a government or as a society, that look, you're losing the status that you've had, the social status, but you're gaining this? Like, how do you articulate that and show that vision of that new world?
Yeah, I think in some ways that is maybe the biggest important question for progressives, and in this moment actually is, I think, 2 things, right? I think one thing is, it is really useful to talk about the loss, and it may be certain, if you're a certain kind of like activist, you may not want to be the one talking about that loss, right? If you're like, you might be like, suck it up, I don't want to host you into this new world, right? Like, you're going to need to have that conversation with some other folks, right? So I understand that certain maybe different activist communities don't necessarily want to do that kind of work with people sometimes. On the other hand, I think we have 2 really big tasks, and one is a task of persuasion, and I think that is a really critical thing we need to be doing. I think sometimes we talk about politics, activist logics are very expressive, and I think those are super powerful. Sometimes you need to say, this is bad, this is broken, it needs to change now, right? That's a completely legitimate political act, and we need those. But we also need people, my dad was a labor organizer. My dad was an auto worker who became a labor leader, a labor organizer. And he always talked about the fact that you had to grow the ground of agreement. And he always talked about the fact that when I enter into a space where I'm trying to organize a union, I need to meet people where they are and try to get them to see where I think this would be good for them, right? Joining this union. So you had to sort of meet people where they are and bring them in. And maybe because I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, I think when we're organizers, we also have to be teachers engaged in a practice of persuading, which means meeting people where they are and trying to help them imagine a better world, right? But I also think that as progressives and politically, we need to find a language. I've been calling it like the politics of abundance, or maybe like an aesthetics of justice, which are all super academic-y terms that will not catch on ever. But my point being is that we need to try to imagine a future that looks beautiful for everybody, a future that people can look at and say, I would like to live there. That world looks really appealing to me. Not like this is a world where I have less of everything, but this is a world where maybe I don't have as much of that, but I have more of this. And that looks like a world I want to inhabit. Like, I think painting a picture of a world, because if we don't, the right is really good at saying Biden wants to take your hamburgers, they want to take your sodas. Everything is about less carbon, different, everything is about less, right? Having less. And there's a real reason for that. But I do think we need a language that says, here's this new possible world that could look amazing in these ways. And so that people who maybe are persuadable, some people I don't think are persuadable, they're really locked into their politics. But I think there are a lot of people who aren't sure what the new future looks like. We've never inhabited it. And so they need to be invited into something.
How much of that is simply a function, and I agree with you, the entire, right-wing mentality is constantly talking about loss, ranging from, you will not replace us, down to, you're diminishing my vote and, you're taking my freedoms by being an illegal here. Mm-hmm. How much of this needs to be addressed with material benefits? I mean, if I, as a white male, am looking into a universe of okay, I no longer have the ability to go in and comment on my coworker's legs, and I am, watching television and this black person is centered, or I'm talking on the phone and I've got to press 2 to speak English, that type of thing. How much of the answer is really just material benefits? Because if all of a sudden now, I have parental leave, or I have paid sick leave, or I have, frankly, health insurance that is paid for, and I don't have the certain stresses that are associated with, my cultural status or my perceived cultural status are removed just on a material level. I mean, how much can it be that? I mean, because we're not going to have a group therapy session for everybody. And it's not going to be, and I don't know how open somebody would be to the idea of hey, you don't have to worry about being the sole breadwinner anymore. We're moving into a new world where, you can, however that gets articulated. It seems to me much easier if all of a sudden I just have I don't have to earn as much money. This is decommodified type of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the rise of the highest numbers of immigration have also happened during the same period in this country, of some of the highest numbers, as the gutting of the welfare state, starting with Reagan, right? So it's been 50 plus years, 40 plus, 45, whatever, years of sort of neoliberal politics of undercutting the welfare state, right? And also massive growing inequality. So I think those things are all deeply related, right? The fact that people feel more precarious, there's more inequality, all those things have created a really toxic civic stew for us to have to kind of deal with. So I do think that having people have a sense that they have a future, that they have some sort of possible world they can imagine themselves inhabiting really does matter. And I think that good policies can make a huge difference in that way, when people just feel like things aren't as hard. On the other hand, I do think there's a really entrenched logic for a lot of people. I mean, I think the fact that we're dealing with a global pandemic and we're dealing with people who won't get vaccinated. I mean, one of the things that really strikes me right now is that we kind of understand why conservative politics is willing to make non-white populations experience scarcity, right? Like why they think that's okay for them. What's interesting is, and so in that logic, you'd think, well, when the vaccines came out, white, conservatives would have wanted to hoard the vaccines just for themselves and not let, Black and brown people have them. And instead, they themselves want to live under conditions of more precarity and violence for themselves. Like that really strikes me, is that you have communities that they're not fighting for climate change for their own grandchildren. So there's something really deep about the fact that there's a kind of, I don't know if it's a kind of nihilism or a kind of despair that doesn't even imagine saving their own lives sometimes, or they might think they are because they think the vaccines are poison or whatever, or magnetize them. But this idea that they will, people who were sick still didn't believe in Obamacare. So I don't think it's just a matter of creating better resources. I think resources are really important, but I think that it really is about a slow creating of a different kind of change. And I think we have to think about creative ways of doing that at the local level, because we can't just do this at a national level. Biden's not going to give some speech that's going to make us think we could share, right? This is going to happen in communities. It's going to happen in schools. It's going to happen in, civic spaces. I wish we had national service for every, citizen at 18, or some sort of program also for non-citizens, but something at 18 where we did something civic together. Like I think we need to actually be pretty creative about ways of creating, of breaking out of some of these cycles. And it's not going to come because some leader just gives a great speech, or that we cut a lot of checks. It will help to have a more vigorous, vibrant welfare state, more resources for people. But I don't think that will necessarily be enough. I think it's a really critical step, but not the only one.
Well, it's like, I'm going to go down with this ship because the resentment is just so strong, right? And it's so permeated. And I know Sam kind of touched on this earlier, but you have to make that ship worth saving so that people don't say, screw it, all of us are going to go down together, which sounds insane to me. But yeah, say something.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think that they perceive the ship going down with the vaccine, but I do think there's a togetherness. I mean, I think the idea is that it's another form of developing a sense of community in the same way that they see it as a civic duty to be cruel to immigrants as a way of us and them. The vaccine could have gone easily, it seems to me, the other way. I mean, I think, had Donald Trump woken up one day and be like, actually, no, we need to have the vaccine and we need to make sure the right people get it first, the most important people. And it would have been a completely different dynamic. But since we're on the topic of Trump, and I know that you have some thoughts on this, we have seen Trump did better with Latino voters and Black voters than we've seen from Republicans in a while. And which I think a lot of people are sort of shocked, because he has not hid his hostility for Latino people or Black people for that matter. How does that fit into the context of what you're talking about?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think one thing that is really important in my book, one thing I really talk about is that different populations, that anti-Blackness in this country has a very specific history, and it's unfortunately a history that other communities have participated in. And it's important to always remember that Latinos are not a race. Latino is, you can be white, you can be Black. I always tell my students, have you watched baseball? There are Black Latinos, where Afro-Latinos are a thing. We are Black, we are white, we are mestizo. So it's not a race. So understanding that means understanding that Latinos, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, et cetera, that the politics of race are complicated, right? You can have populations that identify as Black, also populations that want to very much not be Black. And so anti-Black racism, which is, we see this in Latin America with colorism, we see it in the US. So the politics of race in these communities, we talk Black and brown populations, but the brown part of that story is actually much more racially complicated. And my first book was called The Trouble with Unity, and it really was trying to unpack the deep diversities within Latino, Latinx populations. And so that is something we have to think about. And so you have, on the one hand, a lot of Latinos who are engaged and understand themselves as people of color and in racial justice movements. We should always remember that even with 2020, the vast majority of African Americans, the vast majority of Latinos voted for Joe Biden, voted as Democrats. However, and they didn't vote as high for the Republicans as they did under George W. Bush, where George W. Bush got closer to 35 to 40%
Right.
of the vote, and Trump got less. So that's an important just historical fact. But he did do a lot better with particular populations, and not just Cubans. You know, Cubans have been historically more Republican, so people were like, oh, it's the Cubans. It's like, no, actually, there are Mexican Americans in South Texas voting for him as well. And so I think we have to, and that's one reason why I was pointing out that when I talk about whiteness as an ideology, I'm talking about the legacy of white supremacy in this country that has haunted us and has impacted all of us. We are all shaped by that legacy. No, I mean, why would something that powerful not touch all of us? So it shouldn't surprise us that certain non-white populations, or populations that are often deemed non-white, would also be seduced by the politics of domination, right? That they would get drawn in. And I'm not saying every person of color who voted for Trump did it because they're invested in the politics of domination. They might have liked his taxes. They might have liked that he was on a TV show. Right. People vote for all kinds of reasons. But I do think a certain segment of those voters were attracted to the outrageousness and the racial politics that he articulated. And if you're a third generation Mexican American, for example, you don't really speak Spanish anymore, you know, your family's intermarried with lots of different communities, your understanding or sense of solidarity with non-citizen migrants might be very thin. You might not know anybody who's a non-citizen. So we're dealing with like 60 million people, 60 million Latinos in the US. They're not all doing one thing, right? Their politics are doing all kinds of things. And often we talk about them like in this monolithic way, like the Latino vote. There isn't a Latino vote. There are Latino voters, and they vote in a lot of different ways. And we have to get better at analyzing that in the same way we vote, like we talk about the women's vote. Well, there were a lot of women who liked Trump. There's a lot of different kind of women voters. And so, yeah.
How much of it is, and this is just, you know, obviously this is just my own personal experience, but a friend of mine is Puerto Rican, and her family were adamant Trump supporters. And she had a sense that this was a function of wanting to be as American as possible. And that and obviously Puerto Rico, you're American, but to be seen as American. Like, I'm just thinking of like those, you know, in the wake of 9/11, how, you know, so many guys driving a cab or something had to put an American flag in their car on some level. Obviously not the same thing, but the concept of if somebody's out there creating such a big dividing line, you're either on this side of it or on that side of it. And if there's any ambiguity, that sort of like going in one direction hard as a way of establishing your bona fides. Is that a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing you're really pointing to also, which I think is another project for progressives, is how do you create a sense of membership? And, you know, progressives on the whole, we're very anxious about patriotism as a logic because it feels really nativist, and it often feels really kind of USA, it feels aggressive in ways. It has a legacy that we're not super down with. So, but I think but we also love we love our country. We love where we live. We love the places we belong to. We love the people we have connections to. So I think we need some kind of language of membership that offers people a way of feeling like they belong to something they feel passionately about and care about, whether that's a progressive patriotism or we want to call it something else. But I do think that if the dominant language of patriotism has been steeped in a certain kind of nativism or a certain kind of politics of aggressive Americanism, then yeah, you could imagine people who want to be a part of that might be seduced by that or might find pleasures in it, right? And I mean, the fact of the matter is, you know, lots of population, I mean, Puerto Ricans are citizens, right? So anytime Puerto Rican communities identify with migrants, which many do, there's lots of progressive Puerto Rican civic organizations that are very pro-immigration, that's a solidarity stance. So they're standing in solidarity with migrants. They're not like them. They are citizens. And frankly, anytime Latino voters vote on immigration reform, every Latino voter is a Latino US citizen.
Right.
So it's a solidarity language. It's not a language of just like if I'm gay and I vote for gay marriage, I'm voting for something that's like going to impact my life in this particular way. You might be a citizen with lots of non-citizen family. You might be in a mixed status family. So you might be voting what you see as for us. But that us is produced through solidarity. And the good news about that is I can feel solidarity for trans youth. I can feel solidarity for Black lives. I can feel solidarity across difference. So we can all do that. So solidarity politics opens up a lot of different ways of feeling connected and feeling a sense of belonging and membership to people who don't look like me. So I do think, but I think that the maybe the dark side of solidarity is you can be a non-white person and feel solidarity with Donald Trump. You can be a non-white person and feel solidarity with the Oath Keepers right? So I think understanding how the kind of politics of domination, which in America is steeped in a racial politics of whiteness, we need to think about the way that that can seduce non-white populations as well. And in the same way that I think one reason why we're so divided right now is because white America today, and I really try to spend some time in the book on this, is that white America today is more racially divided than it's ever been. There are more white people who are openly appalled by racism in a way than have ever been in the history of this country. There was a kind of consensus around certain kind of racial politics that even liberals in the Northeast kind of abided by. That is no longer the case. That's why families are fighting like hell on Facebook and at Thanksgiving, because a lot of white people are like wanting to stand with an anti-racist politics. So for me, that's an incredibly important good news moment, but it does make us feel more divided. But I would say we feel more divided in part because the politics of this country are no longer, being white and being attached to a politics of whiteness are no longer the same thing. They never always were, but they're less and less that. And that is freaking out the right. The right is more freaked out about Joe Biden, frankly, I think, than Obama in some ways, because those white people standing on the side of racial justice, that's really scary in places like Georgia.
Cristina Beltran, Associate Professor, Director of Graduate Studies at the Department of Social Cultural Analysis, New York University, author of Cruelty as Citizenship, How Migrant Suffering Sustains White Democracy. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Cristina.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, folks, quick break. We'll be right back to wrap it up.
Wait a minute. Pause. Hit the pause button. Something's wrong.
That was perfect. I love that. I missed. All right, folks, if you're watching us on Peacock, we will say goodbye and see you tomorrow. And for those of you who are not, we will head into the fun half of the program. Joining us, among other people, Alicia Brooks will be here to talk about Michael and others. Even just as an example, can't remember exactly at what point in the interview, but I do still hear Michael mocking me at one point, like after, I think when she said, we love our family and we love our thing. And I could just imagine Michael going, as soon as she said goodbye, like, well, Sam, you don't. I mean, that is, something to that effect. That would have been a moment where Michael would have mocked me. I missed that.
Well, I did think of that something to that effect when she said, when you have your second kid, you don't divide your love up. It's a different kind of love.
Exactly.
Right? That would have been
yes.
a primary opportunity for Michael to.
Exactly. That is, I don't know what it says about me that is one of the big things that I miss, but so be it. And we will hear from you. As to what you miss about Michael on the show and others. In the meantime, just a reminder, you can check out Nomi's show at youtube.com/The Noma Keys Show, Tuesdays and Thursday evenings. Also, Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian universe?
There's a Griscom stream on at about 3 on the Left Reckoning YouTube today, and also we put out a Patreon episode, Andrew Hartman on the Culture Wars. That's patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get that episode that released on Monday.
Okay, folks. Number 646-257-3920. We will take your IMs, and let's try and keep it about Michael today. But I guess if you're a libertarian and you call in, he would have appreciated that too. All right, we'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break. That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
All right, folks, welcome back. I'm gonna read a couple IMs, and then we're gonna then we'll bring Leisha Brooks on. Aaron from Ontario says, a few laughs were as infectious as Michael's. I can picture him nearly throwing up from laughing so hard from the ambush of Steven Crowder. I get genuine joy every time Dave Rubin embarrasses himself because all I ever hear is Michael's voice as Rubin, rest in power, Michael. Yes, he would have, I definitely could hear him laughing during that whole incident. And Chowder with Crowder says, as a Slav, I miss Michael's work in normalizing the Adidas tracksuit as the uniform of serious public intellectuals. 3 stripes for life, Bratvan. You are missed. So I want to welcome to the program Michael's sister, Leisha Brooks. Do we have her?
I should be joining momentarily.
DJ Danarchy put out a 7-minute audio clip of Michael's laughing on Twitter. I listened to it twice last night. It was pretty good. But yes, in terms of the Michael's laughter being very infectious, missed that terribly. Do we have Leisha?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, let's bring her on.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, Leisha.
Hi, Alicia.
I always listen to the show. I don't watch it. I was chuckling so hard at the visuals for the intro song into the fun half.
Yeah.
Oh, is my Wi-Fi bad?
Your Wi-Fi is
Okay.
a little bad.
Let me try something. Banter 1 second. Hold on.
Okay, we'll read some IMs. M. Joe Mine. Thank you, Sam and MR Crew, for the lovely memories shared of Michael. Jonathan Armstead. Michael lives on in his analysis and his jokes. Today I saw a story on Right Wing Watch about how Bishop Larry Gators said that Kobe Bryant was killed by Hillary Clinton because he was demanding payment for his speaking engagement to the Clinton Foundation. My first thought in Bernie or Bust Bill Clinton voice was, she had his body dragged to the park. That impersonation is stuck in my head like Inception.
All right, I should be good. I joined my personal hotspot. Shout out.
Okay. Yeah, congratulations on the personal hotspot. That's great.
Very big time.
So thanks for joining us. We're just obviously reminiscing. I know that you've compiled. Tell us what you've compiled for. Is it going to be on tonight?
Yeah. So tonight I put together a video of basically it's a combination of Zoom conversations I had with people and videos they sent in. And it's people from around the world talking about Michael's impact. And I mean, it just never, it doesn't stop surprising me. And kind of just, I don't know, I don't really have words for it. Just the amount of impact Michael had globally is just astonishing. And I keep wondering if he even was aware of just how far spread and how significant his work was. So it's really cool. It's going to be at 7 p.m. on the TMBS channel, Eastern Standard.
He would be pretty excited, I think, to have that awareness. And I ran into somebody who had just gotten off the phone as I was walking up on Flatbush. A guy named Jay just came up and said he had talked to you about Michael. Yeah, it's pretty amazing the wide range of people too. I think that Michael touched and meant so much to in terms of his show. I don't know. I was just going to read some IMs, maybe take some calls. If there's something, I don't know, in particular that you want to talk, or just listen in on, and we can, take these and see. We played at the top of the show what I believe is the first time that Michael did Right Wing Mandela on the show.
Yeah, I saw.
And it was really fun to relive that. Here's let's go to Salinas Lefty. This interview reminds me of that Chris Rock bit where he talks about how white people get mad and say we're losing the country, man. And he says if y'all losing, who's winning? Because it ain't us. The Tim Caucus. I've been thinking about whiteness and relating it to notions of toxic masculinity and men's liberation. I've been considering if and where there might be a role for positive whiteness framing of this. Really appreciated her point on acknowledging the loss.
I think no, because of whiteness as a political project. I think you can't, you need to defang that. I don't think you can have positive whiteness. I think it's just a political project.
You can't salvage it.
Yeah.
I think for men, there's some positives that you come with, but
yeah, you got to not, in terms of a liberatory political project, you got to not think of it as whiteness. It has to be, we have to identify some other kind of way.
Benny P writes, I still don't have health insurance, but at least Bezos finally got to go to space. It's about time that guy caught a break. I sort of feel like Michael would have had a field day with something like this too, in particular.
Well, I mean, the quote was that he just said, Bezos says he thanks every, quote, Amazon employee and every Amazon customer because you guys paid for all of this. The lack of self-awareness, I said he should just, if he was just sitting on the backs.
It was pretty magnanimous of him, though, wasn't it?
Well, to say thank you, as he almost, literally sat on piles of Amazon workers' dead bodies who died of COVID in his facilities and just drank champagne. Thank you for taking me to space, though. For 11 minutes.
Well, to be fair, we all got to share in that.
Yeah, but the way he talks about it
There's
as
a
if
video, too.
he's a MVP of the NBA and all of his like lesser teammates helped him out. It's like, no, you're
I'm so
breaking their
humbled
bodies.
by this experience.
Justin, what Michael Brooks' death meant and did to me, when I heard of his passing, I was devastated. After coming to grips with his passing, I purchased some reading material I was still wondering if I was going to get. Of course, I picked up his book, but also the 3 volumes of Mark's books. I committed to being much more of an activist in my community as well. Rest in power. I've heard a lot of stories like that from people. I imagine you have too, Leisha.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how many people were looking to Michael as like a professor essentially online, which is, I don't think, maybe in a decade where Michael might have ended up teaching. That wouldn't have surprised me actually in some ways, but that's a reoccurring theme for sure, is the amount of reading that people feel inspired about from him.
Yeah. A Square. Majority Report, glad we are remembering today as it feels sometimes like yesterday that Michael passed. Hope in the future we always do it on Michael's birthday so we remember his light intellect, passion, and humor. So many moments, but of the funny you and him as so-called founding fathers making fun of Ben Carson was priceless. Leisha, thanks for the legacy project. We all too miss him. Rest in power. I forgot about that.
You play the Ben Carson rap. I also forgot about that.
Oh, right.
Do we have that?
The Ben Carson rap, yeah, it's at the top of the thread, Brendan, that I put in Slack. That was the first.
Matt called it.
That was the first thing that Michael and I ever collaborated, like stayed after work to work on together. And yeah, having Michael retake Ben Carson lines to imaginary players beat.
That's very funny. Also, the first time that Michael ever stayed after work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we didn't do it ever again after that.
But there was a bit where Ben Carson was talking about, I can't remember what it was, about the founding fathers. And I guess Michael and I got into our colonial voices and laughed at the idea of a black man becoming a doctor. I think that's what it was. Do we have the Ben Carson rap?
I think we have the F Train Ben Carson. The rap is going to get us in trouble with copyright because I used the beat underneath.
All right, let's listen to the F Train, Ben Carson on the F Train.
It's a lesson for all.
But in the beginning, you would still hear a lot of people say,
Sure,
he has to be smart because he's a brain surgeon.
In the beginning.
And I think you still hear some people say, right, man?
I mean, he's polling well still.
Yeah. Well, he's also polling well about people that are into being stupid.
But that's the other thing with like conservatives is they say they don't like the trappings of elite like learning or whatever. But you see Carson, a brain surgeon, Jindal, a Rhodes Scholar, Cruz, Harvard, like Tom Cotton, Harvard. Like they use this when they have it.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Like we should poll all brain surgeons and see what they think of Ben Carson. That would be actually an interesting thing to know about.
Well, they're all losers. All the brain surgeons, and suck it. Kelly, why you look so sad? Turn that frown upside down. All right. Little street harassment language.
I don't care if you're Ben Carson or not. I've never been such a feminist, or maybe I was,
really?
but I
Never?
didn't realize it.
Really?
But hey, everyone that's listening, it's not nice to tell women to smile when they're not.
Oh,
because,
why you look so unhappy?
Yeah. You'd be so much prettier if you
You'd
smile.
be so much prettier if you smile.
Leave me alone, Ben Carson.
Ben Carson on an F train. Hey, baby girl, where you going? Where you going? Why you running? Let me holler at you for a minute.
They call me gifted hands for a reason.
Oh, shit. Wow. New Matt coming strong. Love it. All right.
I forgot, I like that clip because I make Michael laugh in it.
Yeah, he's calling you new Matt still. That was wow. Matt.
That was like the first or second day he did Thursdays by himself, I think, after Binder left.
There it is.
And Matt, we've been re-airing all the episodes every week, starting with the first episode. I'm up to number 7 now, and you make him laugh a lot.
Yeah, I missed that a lot. Yeah. People should check that out. That's a great little trip down memory lane. After Michael passed, I I did watch all those Thursday shows because that was a big, like, so much of my thought process is he's embedded himself into at this point, like, and to see like where they sort of originated from and where I first came, like that point I was making about the Republicans and trappings of elite. That's not that interesting of a point, but I was like working through stuff like that, and it was great to be able to do it with him.
I think it's pretty interesting.
Wolfie. Almost every Hispanic I've worked with was Mexican. Almost every Hispanic I worked with hated black people and were pro-Trump. Almost every Hispanic I worked with was, repeated that. Love the show and R.I.P. Michael. Illuminati kids. It's not easy to check out the deep archives on the new app, but I recommend anyone who doesn't mind revisiting the past to listen to all 4 of the live coverage episodes from the 2016 RNC. This is my first time hearing MR since Air America, and I was blown away by how funny Michael was. Chicken salad restaurant. Something I found so important about Michael was that his leftism was rooted in love for his fellow humans, not spite. Yeah, I think that was a big part of his, and particularly where he was going with what he was thinking about stuff. Bashkar is here. Alicia, hang in if you want. We'll have Bashkar on as well. Bring him on.
Can I just say one thing and then I'll bow out to others? I just want to say that one of the reason that I'm kind of going back and trying to do all this legacy work is because Michael, everyone who watched MR saw him grow and evolve in his politics and who he was as a person. And I think it's important to kind of like share his work and inspire people, but I also want to encourage everyone out there that feels like, oh, this is this like insurmountable like comparison to like do what Michael did or become what Mike, who Michael was. And I think that Michael's story is someone who just learned a lot, cared a lot, and just kept working and just kept challenging his own thought and evolving, and everyone can do that too. So yeah, all right, hopefully y'all can tune in tonight. I'll video out, but I'll hang and listen.
Okay.
Thanks, Alicia.
Bye, Alicia. Yeah, that's a great point too. That's a great point too about Michael in terms of his development over the course of the show.
Yeah, he nurtured his curiosity really well. It wasn't that he was born with just like a supercomputer brain. He was a very, very quick guy, but like he showed that you can live a life where you're not afraid to investigate things, and it actually helps you and everybody around you if you put the time in.
All right, let's bring Bhaskar Sankara onto the program, from the Jacobin offices.
Yes, I'm from the Jacobin office, and I just locked myself out of the office. So I'm in a hallway talking on my phone, but which epitomizes, I think, a lot of our mental states today. It was, it both feels like a year hasn't passed yet, and also it's kind of, it feels like it went by really quickly. I think especially because of the pandemic, I think a lot of us haven't seen close friends and family in a while. So, occasionally I have the tragic, reminder that I won't get another chance to hang out and spend time with Michael. But on my way to the office, I was thinking about what anecdote or what story I would tell about Michael, and I just didn't have a good one. And I thought that somehow the synapses in my brain would just click, and I would come up with one on the fly. But I guess all I have to say is that I miss him dearly, and he was a professional in the best sense. I think sometimes we think of people being morally committed and politically committed, and we see that as the opposite of professionalism. And what I mean by professionalism isn't some self-serving careerism. I mean, he, right before he did one of his last public talks at the Bell House, right when the pandemic was just starting to hit in early March, when everyone was kind of nervous we were in the building, but it still wasn't at the point where people were canceling events or things. He stopped by the Jackman office before he came over there, and he gave me kind of a rundown of this impression, the Chris Matthews impression that he was gonna give, and it was incredible. And he's like, "What'd you think?" And I was like, "That's one of the best things I ever heard." then I saw him perform it on stage, and then I kind of got it, like, because he was such a naturally funny and talented person. It seemed so effortless with him, but he actually worked at it as a craft, if that made sense. He worked on his knowledge. He read constantly. He was very curious. He asked experts and he interviewed people. He really wanted to learn more about things, but also his craft as a comedian. And I think that's like a definitely a title that he deserves, because he wasn't a political comedian. He was political and he was a comedian, you know, and in a certain way. So it was that day that it kind of clicked to me that this effortless charisma and talent that he had was actually something he worked hard at, and he put a lot of effort into all the stuff that we all got from him and all his fans got from him.
Yeah, and I would add too, I think that like his, particularly in this sort of like YouTube universe, he did not really get too caught up in the pettiness that is easy to do. Like he tried to maintain relationships with people that he, disagreed with, above and beyond like most people do. And I think that's a sort of a similar
Well, he had a big picture view, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that was, I feel, I don't know, Bhaskar, if that's how you characterize it too, but that's always what sticks out to me is, so many people get caught up in ego and smaller things because your professional life is your personal life. But I never, ever, it was fast with Michael.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there was something to him having very strong opinions, but not wanting to burn bridges, and also like remembering that he himself had evolved on a lot of different issues, and he was thinking critically about different issues. So I think that often on the far left, on the socialist left especially, we feel like we have the formula and we have the keys and we have the science, and it's an evolutionary process where everyone who thinks differently are just like a few steps behind, and either are going to be capable of evolving to our position or just like left behind. So I think that there was something in Michael's vision that was more pluralistic, but I do think he was not afraid to buck certain trends. And this is something, especially the last few months of his life, we kind of flipped on certain, I would say that, I'm going to put this crudely, but I would say in like 2016, 2017, he was probably softer on what people often call identity politics than I was. And by the last couple months, I think he did want to lay out a more thoroughgoing critique of a certain type of politics that he saw emerging, and a certain way of talking about politics. And I do think we missed out on some of that, because he would have been able to do it in a way that maybe won over more people than it repelled, and maybe sparked people to think, and at least spark debate. And I just know he would have done it in a way that didn't alienate people and didn't seem mean or vindictive or point scoring or whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to sort of contemplate, what he would have been doing in the future. I mean, he was so young and had so much time and development ahead of him. And I'm talking to somebody who didn't even start to do this stuff until I was about his age. And so there was so much growth ahead of him in terms of where he was going. I find that to be particularly difficult to even contemplate, frankly. It's even more, I think, painful on some level. And, like you mentioned, like it's been a year. It has been so weird on some level. Like it really didn't become more prominent until we started coming back into the studio, where I sort of felt the absence even more, because it's like a ghost appendage on something like that, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, it would have been interesting. I think there was so much more sort of intellectual development to happen in terms of that we've missed out on.
Yeah, and he was a really smart guy. He wasn't a genius, but he read a lot. He read really fast. And he had a combination of intellectual curiosity and also willingness to talk about an issue that he was still in the process of learning about. Was talk with a guest, like, I'm thinking this, what do you think about this, or whatever else, without being afraid of being corrected or being wrong or whatever else. Like, I was really confused when I first met him, because I was like, okay, is this guy like a liberal left guy? He's kind of in the media. Like, I didn't really know where his politics are. And he's asking me questions about Maurice Bishop and the Grenadian Revolution. This is like must have been like 2013, 2014. It was like a long time ago, I guess, when he was first starting at Majority Report. And I was like, who is this guy working for, Majority Report that is asking me about Maurice Bishop and what really happened with the before the U.S. invasion with Bernard Cord and Maurice Bishop? I'm like, where did he get these things? And it was just this intellectual curiosity, and I think that really led him over the course of his political career to the socialist left. It was like what I really loved about the socialist left, what drew me to it to begin with. It wasn't the sectarianism. It wasn't like the petty infighting or whatever else. It was the sense of, you are a member of a political movement that spans the entire world. You're a member of a political movement that has spanned decades. You feel some sort of kinship with a garment worker in the 1920s, or with a revolutionary in Grenada in the 1980s. You feel this kind of trans-historical connection and the same moral and ethical commitment. And to me, I think as I get involved with like various political fights or disputes, so I get bogged down in the day-to-day of my political life or my work or whatever else, I sometimes forget that spirit of true, like, ecumenical moral and ethical commitment to something. And I really wish I got a chance to talk to him a little bit more about meditation, about other things that he was into, that I never, out of disrespect for our friendship, never like poked fun at or like didn't, whatever, but it just wasn't for me. So I didn't really bring it up more. And then obviously, in part because of a year of kind of tough loss, including, Michael, I've like definitely think that far from being a distraction from his overall political vision, this gave him some of the moral fortitude and the depth of inner being that actually made him such a compelling human being and such a compelling media figure too.
I have to admit that I did make fun of him for that a little bit, but that was the nature of the way we did things. I had a whole narrative of him going to a yoga class with a Chardonnay at one point, and
was it Chablis?
Or Chablis? Yeah, I think it was a Chablis. Actually.
What's a Chablis?
I can't remember. It's just like there was a time when I was a youth where there was only basically two types of white wine, Chablis and Chardonnay, I think it was, and that was it. Wine's
I'm almost fully certain that's not correct. But.
Wine's gotten much more sophisticated these days, apparently. Well, Bhaskar, I appreciate you coming on, and it's. It is something I hope that we do. Going forward every July 20th, and just it's been impressive. Like, he's had a couple of videos that have gone viral over the past year, which I think is just such a testament to the.
I
can't believe which Hadid was
Hadid's,
it? Which,
Sherry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're in Israel, Palestine.
There's this, top 2 supermodels in the world.
I hate to say it, he would have loved that. I mean, that's the
yes,
Michael was not immune. He would have been so excited. Oh my God, all of that he would have really enjoyed. But it's incredible that he left this kind of legacy. It showed so much that his star, especially in the last few months, was rising at such a crazy accelerated pace. But his friends obviously didn't change his personality at all. You know, his friends certainly didn't notice, and he's left behind this legacy and this longevity that I didn't really think that someone who did this kind of work could leave behind, because so much of it is like commentary on you know, current events, or kind of like satire related to current events, or whatever else. But I think what people really saw was his whole personality, and his real commitment. So we're gonna do what we you know can to continue on his legacy of Jacobin. I know that there's been incredible work done by Alicia, by others, David, Matt. There's been some lovely tributes by his other friends, like Ben Burgess, like Anna, like Nando. And you know, I think that this community is something that he's left behind, and this network of people will hopefully continue on in his mission. You know, I don't think we'll be as funny as him, we won't be as entertaining, but we could at least carry on the soul of what he was doing, the moral part of his life project, which was just to not make poor people feel like crap for being poor, but make them less poor.
Yep. Bhaskar, thanks so much for coming on today.
Take care, bro.
All right, bye-bye. Clown Shoe Mike, I'll preface this by saying I'm a poor judge of character generally. I actually didn't like Michael at first. I was introduced to him on TYT. First impression was, who the F is this arrogant guy in an Adidas jumpsuit with gold chains? I think that's a reasonable first impression. Seriously, once my bias subsided and I was actually really listening to him, I realized how foolish I was, and needless to say, was devastated at his loss. Hearing his laugh in clips brings a smile to my face. Always, R.I.P. Michael. Kevin N. Max callers reached already. It's Beltran. I don't know. Josh from Tucson, rest in power. Michael Brooks, thank you all at the Majority Report. My thoughts are with all of you. Let's just take a quick call, and then we'll go. Calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sorry, I tried to do a Bernie or Bill Clinton impression. I just can't. It's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. How are you, Josh?
I'm hanging in there. How are you all?
Well, same.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess the thing I want to talk about is I knew Michael. I think one of the things I've noticed since he's passed is he really expanded sort of my appetite for whether it's seeking out, of course, your podcast is always number one in my heart, but seeking out other podcasts or other sources of information, specifically that were internationalist related. And I think his intellectual curiosity and his the fact that he was such a student of history, even history that necessarily he didn't agree with, but that because we could learn so much on the left from that history, I think it's something that I always will take with me, and just his kindness as well. And so I think we still have big shoes to fill, but I think I can't think of someone else who's had this kind of impact, and I thank you all for introducing me to him as well. I don't know, I'm not about to cry, but no, yeah, I'm thinking of you all obviously today, but yeah, he's a special person, and I really appreciate him so much.
Thanks for the call, Josh. Michael really loved to razz on you.
Yes, he did.
He did.
Yes, he did, and he did a great Bernie or bust Bill Clinton that I can't ever do, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure anybody can, but appreciate it, man. Take it easy.
Yep.
We have another Josh on the. Do we have? Joshua Kahn Russell is here. Do we have him?
Hey, Joshua.
Hey, I'm trying to turn on my
video. I'm not sure. Oh, here we go.
Oh.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes. Hi, Joshua. How are you? I think folks should know you're a frequent guest on TMBS, and I know how you guys ended up meeting, and but go. Tell us how you when you first met Michael. That's that first conversation I think I've heard you talk about.
Yeah. Well, first I just want to say how much, it's been such a heavy week for me. It really resonated what you and Bhaskar were saying of like how disorienting it is to realize it's been a year since he died. So I'm sitting with that. And, I was first drawn to Michael because he was self-aware of his role as a broadcaster. Good left pundits, if they see themselves as part of a movement first, rather than being an entertainer or journalist first, I think understand that they're part of an ecosystem and playing a particular highly visible amplification role, but that the media work needs to be in conscious relationship to people playing other roles in grassroots movements. And so when I reached out to him, and kind of challenged him on having more organizers on his show, he introduced me to the online left space. And the more I got to know it, the more shocked I was about how all these media personalities would talk about like the left and talk about our movement, when really what they were referring to is really their own bubble of online discourse at best. Usually they were just referring to their own audiences or that of their competitors. And Michael had a much broader view of the various movement sectors, formations, and milieus that constitute the left, and was really curious about what was beyond his immediate field of vision. And I think that's why it was special and important how Michael built his project in a way that didn't just focus on the top line news cycle or the latest internet debate or electoral dramas, but also historicize things and contextualize the balance of forces in his analysis with movements around the world. His global perspective wasn't just about caring about the rest of the world, but humble in its intention to draw real lessons that we can actually apply for movements in other places. And that was our first connection of meeting each other, was just how can we draw as many lessons from the field as possible, especially where movements are internationally linked. And, just to be clear, I'm not saying all progressive journalists need to be movement people, but if you want to frame or lead debates about strategy on the left, you need to be engaged beyond the limits of the field of vision of the media. And I think Michael was really interested in that.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I mean, I'm sort of alluding to some level where I think like in practice, it also sort of just, he, to a large extent, avoided any of that, stepping into the muck that between those, sort of different forces and whatnot, and was very, I still have a memory of, having him IM me during some of the, really it was during the Jimmy Dore, that debate, just saying like, just, hold back. Don't, like telling me like, just like, no, I think he said, don't take the headshot. Don't take the And I remember that, like, that impetus to sort of like, don't go scorched earth here. There's, we need a wide array of people, I think, was very much, I associate that with Michael.
And if you go scorched earth, you can do it in a comedic voice and have a little bit of detachment from it too.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, at one point, like, there were some parts of the earth that he did ultimately feel like, well, we might as well burn that part. But
I mean, his work inspired me with how focused he was on where he was trying to go, right? And on the interventions he was trying to make. Like you mentioned this earlier, Sam, but even if, you know, he could be petty or interpersonally reactive privately, but he rarely acted publicly from that place.
Right. That's the professionalism. I think that really, you know, was really, I mean, without a doubt, he was just as petty and, you know, interpersonal, you know, and would, you know, say horrible things about a wide range, but it wasn't, he would not let that influence what he knew had to be done for the sake of a bigger project.
Yeah. And I'm almost was more impressed by his discipline because he could be petty. You know, like it's one thing if he was just like above it all and that, but like to be able to have that level of intention, you know, it is because he was focused on winning. You know, like in my collaborations with him, he wanted to know about these outside pressure campaigns that I work on and what they were like for the sake of winning, not for, you know, romanticizing street tactics or movement work. You know, I was talking about this last night with Ben Burgess on his show where we were reminiscing about Michael, that as a strategist, it was amazing for me to just see Michael's brain already work in the ways that we usually need to train activists to think. You know, have a power analysis, identify a target, understand your leverage, organize where you have power, be relevant. You know, and I think these were guiding principles for him. And just to give one example of what I mean, I remember our first conversation about indigenous sovereignty movements on his show, and why non-native people need to be in solidarity with them is, you know, he of course cared about the politics of indigenous resistance for the sake of the dignity and livelihoods of native peoples. But a lot of commentators just stay in the terrain of the moral kind of correctness of that. But Michael's focus was on winning. It was very practical. He immediately understood that, yes, there's power in labor, but there's also power in land, which is the basis of most tribal sovereignty fights. And that's where he was curious. We talked about the victory of the Waorani people that they had just won in Ecuador that protected 7 million acres of rainforest. And it didn't happen from outside or like do good or save the rainforest conservation efforts. It happened from protracted land defense fights that asserted sovereignty. And he was constantly drawn to what was working and built his pragmatism around that. You know, he also cared about the learning from the deeper resilience that indigenous and poor people's movements around the world tapped into through their relationship to land and community and spirit. But he really wanted to leave behind what wasn't working. You know, like in an early conversation that I had when we had, you know, first met, he was asking about pressure tactics. And I shared some curriculum with him from an organization that I was a part of called the Ruckus Society. And we originally called those trainings and workshops "No More Marches, No More Rallies." we shifted it to soften it. We then called it "More Than Marches, More Than Rallies." But his eyes just lit up at the heresy of that, right? He wanted the left to shed the muscle memory of losing, and to shed, you know, the attachment to tactics for their own sake. You know, and he wanted to learn how to do stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that desperately needed that you know, in today's era, that sort of connection between you know, sort of the messaging, but also the strategy there. We should say just say you're at the Wildfire Project. I don't know if you know that that's the kind of stuff that you're doing there on some level.
Yeah. It's and a lot of what we do at the Wildfire Project followed his twin interests in like both the strategy piece, but also the inner work that is required to do strategy. You know, he understood that for grassroots organizations especially, it's not about having the right strategy on paper. It's about the real dynamics of how things play out. You know, like I'm of the perspective that most grassroots social movement groups don't actually have a clear strategy. And a lot of that is actually the result of interpersonal dynamics. It's not the result of not thinking your way through a problem correctly. It's that Well, if you have a culture of conflict aversion within your organization, your strategy is just the lowest common denominator of what everyone can agree to without getting in a productive argument, for example.
Right.
And so what a group needs is not your perfect strategy on paper. They need to learn how to debate well and still love each other through it and not tear each other apart through it, you know? And Michael took for granted that making change was never simple. You know, it was always full of contradictions. It involves compromises and unlikely alliances. And he wanted to think about how you navigate those with a kind of ruthlessness toward winning, for sure, but without losing compassion along the way. You know, whenever we spoke, especially in the beginning of our relationship, he was always curious about the mechanics of organizing, infrastructure building, how we won a particular campaign or built a coalition. I remember the first time that I was on TMBS, it was a patron-only episode, and we had scheduled it way in advance. And I ended up calling in after a civil disobedience action pressuring Governor Newsom around fracking when he had been hosting this big international climate change summit. And I can't remember what we were supposed to talk about, but we just threw the plan out the window so he could just ask questions about the details of that moment. So his desire to zoom into the kind of messiness was why I was so immediately drawn to him. And throughout the rest of our time working together, in addition to the big picture conversations we would have on the main show about spirituality or about, you know, movements, we did calls for patrons with Q&As, for people who were trying to build organizations and groups. They were kind of like clinics for people in the audience who wanted help problem solving. And on the show, we would do segments about those, you know, how to build a power analysis, how to build a campaign, pick a target, how do you set short, mid, and long-term goals, how do you build escalating pressure, all the kind of nuts and bolts things. As well as, you know, he wanted me to tell war stories from the field, but for the sake of eliciting lessons, right? Because Michael wasn't just an entertainer, he was also a teacher. And it was interesting to hear Leisha reflect earlier that, you know, he might have ended up as a professor at one point. But those segments that we did together on that stuff didn't always get the most views because they weren't, you know, polarizing takes about top line news stories. But he did them anyway, because the audience who watched them engaged with them really deeply. And I think that was his interest in application of his work was what struck me, that, you know, he was the only YouTube host that I knew who was really interested in having his work used in the field. Like I would use his clips as political education for grassroots groups that I was training and working with. And whenever I would mention that to him, he would always say, you know, that was the highest compliment he could get. Right. And I believed him.
Yeah. He had a tremendous amount of respect for you, obviously. I mean, you don't, you know, and he would speak very glowingly of you often.
Yeah, I'll just say, Joshua was a real breath of fresh air for TMBS, particularly on these kinds of topics, because they are a lot, like, I think, mystified for a lot of people, especially if you're engaged in politics mainly as a media consumer. And I think being able to demystify it and give people some steps was really important.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. It's also nice to hear your voice right now. Yeah. Could I share? I know it's time to jump soon. Can I share a couple other things I'm grateful to Michael for?
Yes.
Well, first, I just want to say he really taught me about having an ego. That ego and humility aren't mutually exclusive. You know, that it was okay to have personal ambition, and that, generally speaking, you know, organizers are trained to think that egos are like the enemy of movement building, that they only get in the way, that nothing should ever be about you ever, and that anyone who makes anything about themselves is, you know, to be distrusted. And Michael helped shake me out of the self-defeating excesses of that mindset. And of course, I would struggle with his ego at times, and he could get stuck in himself, which is something that I'm, you know, prone to myself, which is why it was so irritating to me. But he, you know, was constantly, you know, like, he helped me realize that judgmental attitude for many organizers was a posture that keeps us small and keeps the left afraid of its own power and keeps us from really imagining being able to lead society, let alone winning. And the flip side of ego is affirmation seeking self-consciousness, and I think it's good for the audience to know how much anxiety he had, because that's part of the picture of how he navigated the role he was choosing to play in the world. And he did have a lot of anxiety, and on a personal level, that's a lot of what we talked about, supporting each other both through generalized anxiety, but also overwhelm at the pace of this historical moment and finding meaning within it. And in many ways, we were super different from each other, but our inner lives took similar shapes. And that's why on the show, we always wanted to talk about how to stay grounded through it all, especially as the pandemic was getting underway. And, all of this was related to how, he would talk on the show about his Vipassana meditation practice, which Bhaskar mentioned, and, other ways to quiet the mind. One thing we had in common was that all that was coming from necessity. Our minds were so loud all the time, and we needed to take time away to integrate it and get, perspective. And, it was clear that Michael had a lot of irons in the fire with a lot of people, like a lot of projects planned and seeds planted. And that was definitely true for me. I do think about often like what would have grown from all of these various collaborations. And I'm just grateful to get to see all of his different collaborators continue their projects and to continue to follow them. And, he and I had political differences, but even where we disagreed, his clarity helped me get clearer. And, so I'm grateful for the ways that he was always responsive to me challenging him. And, in his work, he inspired me with his focus on, his just relentless focus. And I'm grateful for how he expanded my world. And he helped me take myself a lot less seriously by making fun of me in public. And I'm not sure overall how I feel about him bringing me into the YouTube, Twitter, online left discourse. But the opportunity to get to speak to a different kind of audience than I was used to was a beautiful gift. And the relationships that I've gotten to build as a result with remarkable people, I cherish. And, including you, Matt. And I'm grateful for the way that he believed in me and made me feel like I belonged in the project and owned my role. And I'm grateful to you, Sam, for your role in bringing Michael's voice into the world and training him, and it was hearing Michael on your show that first compelled me to reach out to him. And my relationship with Michael changed my life. And in that aspect, you changed my life too. And I know that's true for many other people. So I just wanted to thank you for that, Sam.
Well, Joshua, I appreciate you coming on. And yeah, it's particularly painful to think about, what we're not seeing from him. On some level, it's oddly comforting for me to watch this stuff and a little bit less painful than thinking about what we're not going to get. But I appreciate the work you do, and thank you so much for coming on. And, in some ways, it's still sort of hard to digest, frankly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But appreciate it, Joshua, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks again.
Okay. Let me just take one quick phone call here. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. How are you, sir?
I just have some questions about the Helitushi, actually. What's the PSI like? Because you describe it as a spray, but I'm looking for, somewhere just this side of a pressure washer, if you know what I mean.
He would have appreciated that so much.
So I tried to tell my Michael story. You did a show amazingly. This is like one of the greatest feats of human strength the day after he passed. And I just really crowded it up. I just started crying halfway through. I had to hang up. So I'll try to tell you a little bit about my experience with Michael. he flew out here once. We went to Rainier. We got a cabin with my family, and I brought a bunch of your DVDs because at the time you were like giving them away, and so I was like, we could watch The Bad Situationist or whatever the other ones are, but I also brought Red Dawn. Whatever the other ones are. Sorry, that was kind of rude. I brought Red Dawn too, and he wasn't. I don't mean to tell on him now, but he didn't want to watch your movies, so we watched Red Dawn.
Right.
And it was great. I always wanted him to do commentary tracks on like 80s Red Scare movies as bonus content, but you know, he had bigger plans. The one thing that stands out about Michael, for me, he was always, you know, reaching out and just seeing like how I was doing, asking about the family. And we got into, like, looking back, this is really dumb, but like during the primary, at one point he had said, and nobody better tweet at me about relitigating this. I'm not interested at all. But he had said, you know, Marianne Williamson was his number 2, and I got kind of offended by that, and you know, tried tweeting at him or whatever. And he would call me or text and be like, "Hey, you know, like, you know me, like we can talk about this stuff," which like people don't really do anymore. That's kind of an old timey, like an old soul thing to do. Like, people now just sort of like tweet and block and whatever. But he was always the one reaching out to me to say like, hey, like, you know, whatever we have to discuss, we can discuss. And so that's kind of the thing that I carry with me the most, like that instinct that he had to do that. And now, like, that he's gone, to think that like we had any moments of awkwardness over like how bad Elizabeth Warren did suck or whatever, like it's kind of irrelevant. But I also feel lucky to have, you know, reached out to him a couple days before he passed, and I looked back at my text messages on the 16th. We had a conversation, and he was talking about traveling and, you know, had big ideas for his show. And I did a bit about like Michael as Rick Steves. Like, I don't know if you know Rick Steves. He's a PBS host. He does a travel show. He's like the dorkiest guy ever. He travels in like, you know, pressed khakis and a polo. So anyways, I was like, oh, you're going to be like Rick Steves in a fanny pack going to like, you know, CIA mass graves in Guatemala or whatever with sunscreen on your nose. He thought that was kind of funny. But, and you know, again, I was looking back at those messages today. He was asking about my family and everything. And so I really miss that, because I honestly, like, just in life, I don't have a lot of friends like that. You know, even people I know much more intimately don't take the time to just sort of reach out. And the last thing I'll say, 'cause I'm talking too much, but I always think about Michael when people say, you know, the left is too PC or, you know, snowflakey or whatever. Michael always understood it was about, you know, form versus substance, right? And making sure that cruelty wasn't the point. But, you know, when he met my wife, he immediately did Borat voice, I think for the entire weekend. And my wife doesn't even have an accent. It didn't matter. She's from Ukraine, so he was going to talk that way. He was going to talk that way the whole weekend, which, you know, she didn't love, but he fucking powered through that shit like for 3 days and just, you know, made it work and tried to win her over. And so, you know, but he never lost sight of, the people and the humanity behind everything he was doing. So thanks for bringing him into all our lives. I think I was mentioning last year when I called in that he really started out as this guy who was just constantly screwing up the tech and like not playing the clips right or whatever, or this voice in the background. And you gave him the space that he needed. And you two really, I think, it was a combination for me personally, I think that really worked, the two of you working together. So I love the current iteration of MR2. This is like, it's been really, really good lately, I feel like. Anyways, so just thank you for the show and for continuing to do it in the way that you do.
Ron Reagan, thank you. Appreciate the call. Michael was a big fan. Ron Reagan, a few people could really crack him up. Well, not with a few people could crack him up, but on a consistent basis. Like that Michael would say, like,
if anybody has a higher batting average than Reagan, I'd be curious who that would be.
Right.
He'd say, boy, yeah, he would like say, like, he's really funny. I don't know about that, but all right. Let's bring Gene on. Do we have him? Gene, are you there?
Can you see me?
Yes. Gene Bajlan, also regular on TMBS. And I think, Gene, I think you were the first person who like brought Michael out to like talk to students. Is that right?
Actually, it was with a colleague of mine. I introduced him to a friend of mine, Maria Rapnikova, who brought him to the University of Atlanta to speak to students, and he had a wonderful time. And he struck up a strong friendship with Maria. But yes, I guess I was kind of instrumental in his first meeting with students, and I know he had a wonderful time. It was like an amazing trip. And my friend Maria, who's like a very well-respected scholar of China, had such utter respect for him. Joshua and Bashka and Ronald Reagan have said, many beautiful things about Michael, very accurate things about Michael. And as Leisha noted, he had an enormous amount of respect amongst academics because he was able to converse with them and talk with them on, that kind of level of interest and intelligence and sort of background reading. So, he had enormous respect. And I remember him saying that to me, that one of the highest respects that he had was, academics telling him that, oh, you could have been an academic. And in my opinion, Michael was far too good to be an academic, especially, his ability to communicate complex ideas and to make people who were not particularly inclined to care about issues. And I think, America in general, and even the American left is, somewhat parochial, but, Michael truly had that sort of ability to communicate the importance of events going on in other parts of the world, moving out beyond sort of the limited sphere of the American left. And, that was, and I know he had an influence on young people because, every so often I have students here in the middle of Springfield, Missouri, the COVID capital of America at the moment, that students will say, oh, do you know Michael Brooks? I watch his show. He's really funny. He does great impressions. I've met people who have told me that, oh, he influenced them to pick a specific career. I recently spoke with a young journalist who was moving out to my neighborhood of the Woods, who told me how important, Michael was to him and how influential he was. And there are just people, all over the world who've been touched by, Michael's work. And I think that's a real testament. I think, I know he was spiritual. I'm not particularly spiritual, but if he's looking down from heaven, I think he would be, extremely happy to see the enormous impact he has had on people, especially young people, because the way he spoke He didn't speak down to people. He didn't dumb things down. But at the same time, he could communicate in a way that I wish more people were able to communicate about, events and, things happening around the world and why it matters to them and why they should care and, what they should do. He was able to bridge between this academic world, between the sort of left media ecosphere world and the activist world, in a very adept way, which I think not many people do. He stayed away, and as people have noticed, he stayed away from like the personal beefs and the kind of WWE style that sometimes infects the media sphere on the left. And that is despite the fact that, Michael could in sort of his private life be quite a hater when it came down to certain people and certain individuals, but he would never, he would occasionally ring me up out of the blue and go on about something or someone who had really annoyed him, but he wouldn't take that into the public sphere. And I think, that is people have spoken about the professionalism, that was part of his professionalism. He was, and not only was he able to sort of connect those three spheres of the media sphere, the academic sphere, and the activist sphere, but he was able to kind of bridge the kind of electoral left and the revolutionary left, being able to speak to both of them. And, even if people didn't agree with him 100% of the time on every single issue, he didn't take it personally. He could make a strong stand on something that might be controversial on the left. For example, the work that we did together on, Syria and the Kurdish movement in Syria was controversial amongst the left. And, he got heat from that, from people, even from people he respected, but he didn't use that as an opportunity to burn bridges or to get into a fight with someone on Twitter. He would occasionally sort of message me and like, look at this person attacking me on Twitter. And I was like, are you going to respond? He's like, no, why would I respond? It's pointless. It's just he was kind of ecumenical with his leftism. And that meant that he had an enormous reach to people, which I think, we're kind of missing on the left. What he did was not news entertainment. What he did was political education. That was his mission, because this wasn't just, Michael could hustle his YouTube show and his Patreon and stuff like that. But he wasn't hustling that to, self-aggrandize. He was hustling that because he saw himself as part of a movement and of him having a job that wasn't just to get clicks and likes, but to get people activated into politics. Lula is a big deal on the left, at least on the, is a bigger deal on the left, I think in part because of, the continuous emphasis that Michael made on that case. And, I think he did that in, he did a really important thing in that way. And I think, I don't see anyone filling his space, and I don't think anyone could fill his space because, he was a kind of a unique individual who combined like a magnetic personal charisma reinforced by an ego, for sure, a comedic ability, but also an incredible amount of, humbleness when it came down to that, an incredible amount of respect for people, even if they, didn't share every single view that he had. And I think, there's a lot of lessons that we can take from that, his ecumenical nature towards the left, his global perspective. And I should say this, I spoke to two chaps from Germany who started doing a German podcast in the German language precisely because, they'd been inspired by Michael Brooks. And it's just phenomenal to see, how much influence he had in his short lifetime. And, it's painful to consider, how he would have, what he could have done had he lived longer. And I really feel the absence of his voice at this critical time for the left, with the kind of collapse of the Bernie Sanders project, the kind of malaise that's taking place amongst people on the American left. I think, his voice would have been really needed to provide kind of perspective, because he could speak to many different factions on, what is very often a fractious and contentious wing of American politics. And, I find, I just like, I feel his loss, and, I don't know. I mean, we all have to recover and continue his work, but it feels so heavy and so difficult. He was, Ben Burgess used this analogy. He was like the Alexander the Great of the of left media, in that he rose so quickly and became so influential on people. It's the counterfactual of what would have happened if he'd survived. It is sometimes painful to think about.
Yeah, I've been saying that's sort of the most difficult part for me to sort of wrap my head around. There's just so much left on the table in that respect. 37 is a very young age, and particularly I felt like he was just at the beginning of what he was doing, and it already had so much influence.
And he had a global influence. One of the aspects I really liked about Michael was that he was able to kind of square the circle on, the issue of anti-imperialism. He was able to be, a forthright critique of American empire without falling into the kind of glorification of authoritarian regimes around the world. And, some people didn't like that of him, but I think, I know many people on the Kurdish and Turkish left appreciated his stance. People on the Iranian left appreciated his nuanced stance, because, it's very easy to, glorify, regimes in Tehran or in Damascus in a kind of knee-jerk response to the problems of American empire. But he, maintained that nuanced approach, which meant that he had appealed to leftists not only in the United States, but leftists who were dealing with their own problems in different circumstances in different parts of the world. And I'm deeply honored. I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do together in our collaboration. I was, very pleased, I'm honored to have been able to call him a friend, that he called me, that we discussed things together. And, I really miss him. It feels like, on one hand, because of COVID, because of all the political events that have taken place since Michael's passing, that, so much time has passed. But then when you think about it, it seems like only yesterday that he passed away. And, this is something which, it's just hard to describe the feeling. And I know so many people out there feel the same way. And I know from a personal level, Michael has had a profound impact on my life. There are people that I got to know through Michael that I would never have gotten to know. I've gotten to know Matt and David, Doug Lane from Zero Books, Ben Burgess, Leisha, and sort of indirectly Pascal Robert and Jason Miles. I would never have met these people. I would have never been able to work with these people if Michael hadn't encouraged me, hadn't introduced me to people. And, so, personally speaking, his effect on my life, on my thinking, is kind of incalculable. And, I have good memories of him. We spent time together in the Ozarks. He ducked out of work for a week. I don't know what he told you but he ducked out and came to the Ozarks. We went up to for a hike in the hills. We lurked around Missouri State University campus, which I believe Emma has actually been to Missouri State University campus to see a Trump rally. So and
they all blend together. I wish I remembered.
Yeah, they all pretty much do blend together. That's certainly true. But it was it was an honor. And people remember Michael for his Brazil stuff, but he was like very well versed on Turkish and Kurdish politics.
In fact, that was where he started.
Yeah, he'd been in Ankara. He'd studied in Ankara. He'd studied with Luke Mayville, who of course now is a really important activist in Idaho. So, like the network that he built, that he was building, he was building to a purpose. He wasn't just, he wasn't building for himself. He was building, with a purpose, with an objective, with a political project, which I think, again, a lot of left-wing commentary comes down to like what I call AOC discourse, where it's like, is AOC a good guy? Is AOC a bad guy? Am I angry about this thing on Twitter? Michael avoided that stuff and, did these deep dive political education things, and I think that was, a really big contribution. And I think, in part that was your influence on him. I once asked him, would you say Sam Seder was your mentor? And that was the only time he got a little bit offended. He was like, I wouldn't call Sam my mentor. He said, it's like, we work together. We work together. But yeah, no, I think he had enormous respect for you. He had enormous respect for people, and he wanted to win people over. Like, there were a couple of people who he thought were beyond the pale and who were just silly. But by and large, his objective was to win people to his political positions without, being an idiot about it, without, being cruel. I mean, he has that saying, be kind, be ruthless with systems, be kind with people, that, people often quote. And I think that is a lesson that we all, need to take on board. We need to take on board his kind of soft stance on spiritualism, because I know, I myself kind of come out of the more hardline atheist wing of things, but he helped me soften my stance on those kind of things. And people say he was super smart, which he was, but what I think what made him special was that he cared, because the reason he knew things about things around the world was because he cared. When he listened to people, he read things. And when you care about something, you remember. Everybody's taken an exam where they've crammed and they've learned everything and they forget it immediately afterwards. Michael wasn't like that. He would remember things because he saw them as relevant and important. And he really did believe what he was saying, and he really did believe in his project, whether you agreed with it or not. I think even people I know who politically disagree with him have said, well, I might disagree with Michael on this or that issue, but I never doubt his sincerity and his good faith engagement with things. And I would say, kind of as a final thing, the thing that brought Michael to my attention was an impression that you've all probably forgotten, was an impression of Louis Gohmert talking about pre-battle massages and about gay people in the military, and whether gay people could serve in the military. And it was just hilarious what he was going on about. I know about pre-battle massages. And, he was a phenomenally funny guy, and he often would say to me he wanted Bill Maher show. He wanted to have the Bill Maher show and do the funny thing instead of having a bloviating buffoon like Ma, posturing as the kind of funny left-wing person on American media. He wanted to push American media to the left. And, yeah, what could have happened? I don't know what else to say. Everybody has spoken beautiful words today. And, in the lead up to this day, it was it's kind of a crazy time. For just thinking, it's been a year already, and and I still appreciate the Majority Report, but it is a different show without Michael. And I'm not saying better or worse. I'm saying it's a different show, and I will always miss Michael and you and Michael's dynamic, which was very much a kind of comedy duo, a political comedy duo, and a type of political satire which I don't believe anybody can do, because it was, right-wing Mandela, Chris Matthews, Nation of Islam, Obama. I don't think anybody else could have come up with such deep but also funny and accessible comedy.
I agree. Well, Gene, I appreciate you coming on. And
thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak. See you all soon.
Bye-bye. All right, we have one more guest to have on. Folks on the phones, I'm not sure we're going to have time to get to everybody at all, so I don't want you to hang on if that's going to be an issue. I want to. Do we have Waz? Wozni Lambre is here. He's, obviously was a regular on TMBS.
Whoops.
And now at the Ringer. Waz, you here?
Yes, I'm here. What's going on, guys?
How's it going? Thanks for joining us. You're a little bit soft focus. Is that a conscious decision?
It's a glam melee thing.
Yeah, that's a very.
No, it might just be fog from the camera. I don't know.
Waz
there we
Waz is a fashion commentator now.
No, I understand.
Waz, is that your ringer setup? Like,
Yeah, this is my setup in my living room / dining room here. Yeah,
Sounds
very sophisticated.
It's very sophisticated. I love the backdrop. Appreciate you coming on.
Of course, thank you for
obviously,
having me.
Very close with Michael, and you know, I don't know your thoughts a year into it. I mean, it hasn't felt like a year. I don't know. Go ahead.
You know, when I really think about it, reflecting on the past year, like obviously I was friends with Mike and was very conscious of how talented and smart and all of that stuff that he was. But I you know, to be honest, in real time, I didn't realize the type of effect that he was having on people. That's what really comes into focus for me in the past year. Just my own little world that, you know, I brought Michael into on the sports side when he passed, obviously so suddenly and so tragically. So many people reached out to me that were introduced to Michael's work via our thing and was just like, this guy made me do a 180, 100%. Like my mind was changed about the way I need to be thinking about politics and our world by this dude because of his way of communicating. And that's what, you know, that's really what I think about in the last year is like, you know, the magnitude of what this guy was doing was lost on me in real time. And, you know, I have a greater appreciation for it now, being able to look back in retrospect. And I think, you know, what I really learned too, just talking to more and more people who were close to Mike, like I was, I think what really resonated with people and still resonates with people is the sort of moral and ideological clarity and coherence. You know, I think we're in a moment right now where people on the left are carrying pitchforks to get people fired from jobs for tweets from 10 years ago, right? Because it might be racially insensitive, right? And I think what Mike was doing a good job at was, you know, if we're gonna sort of center an identity, then it can't be something as amorphous as race or even gender. We're learning is amorphous. Like we can't center it on that. We got to center it on something more concrete, which is why I think he was always banging and hammering the sort of class struggle in America and in the world, right? And I think, to me, that's the biggest thing I take away from it. It's like, well, I don't know that we want a world where people can just be fired for 10-year-old tweets. Like, even if they say things that we happen to not be, you know, we don't think of the right buzzwords, or you don't talk about gender non-binary people in the right way, and you said the wrong pronoun, or you used a word that might be racially insensitive to Black people, or whatever the case may be. You know, I don't know that we want to live in a world where you can get fired for for a tweet, because man, it should be really hard for a person to lose their job, right? When you live in America where there's no social safety net, nobody takes care of you. The only way for you to survive is a job. And so therefore, if that's the only way people can get by in this place, we should not be pushing for a world in which people can very easily lose the only thing that's keeping them from destitution. You know, like that's easy to understand, right? And I think that's what Mike was doing a great job at, was explaining what really should truly matter to folks. And, you know, at the same time, I think other things that I learned about Mike was, you know, I would talk to him about like being image conscious, right? And I think it's a part of the same sort of idea of meeting people where they live, in the sense that people respond to certain images. So if we want to get our message through to people, it can't just be like, all right, we've read volumes of books and done study and research, and so therefore you should receive my message. That's not how people operate, right? Like, you want to present everything that, you know, you're trying to get across to people in a manner that they can internalize and receive. And Mike was always thinking about that, how to better communicate the message and the work, right? Which is, again, these are all things that I think about all the time now. It's like, it's not enough that you're quote unquote right or wrong. Like, that's so beyond the point, right? And I think especially on the left, we're so obsessed with people, the most well-studied, the most academic, blah, 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 blah. But on the other side, you know, rest in power, Rush Limbaugh. I think what that guy understood was, now I'm going to meet people where they live. I'm going to get through to them. Sure, we don't agree with his message, but he understood that it goes beyond being quote unquote right or wrong. It's about effectively communicating to folks. And, you know, I don't want to evoke Rush Limbaugh in a remembrance of Mike, but I think Mike could even understand what Rush Limbaugh was good at. As evil as some of the messages that he was getting through, even somebody like Mike could identify, all right, this is what he's doing that's working. What can we take from that to get our thing across to people? Because, you know, and I think there was an optimism in Mike about, I think there's a lot of pessimism now about what's in people's hearts and minds. And, you know, I don't know that we could, maybe it just is, right? Maybe this fatalistic, deterministic, like, all right, well, we just live in a bad racist country. You know, another thing I admired about Mike was just his optimism, to be able to get through to people despite all of these differences and all the ways that folks are being propagandized, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I think about is the optimism, the clarity of the message, and just an emotional intelligence and understanding of people and giving them what they want. You know what I'm saying? Like, if people want good looking people on their TV talking about things, all right, cool. Let's get good looking people up there talking about leftist politics, right? Let's give the people what they want so that we can ultimately end up in a place that's most advantageous for most of us.
How did you guys meet? Like, what was the, how did you end up working together?
So I'll never get tired of telling this story because it's really remarkable. And it comes full circle because I'm working at The Ringer for Bill Simmons. And so this is going to be a little bit long-winded, but I do want to tell this through line for you guys because in a roundabout way, Bill Simmons turned me into a leftist. So Bill Simmons founded Grantland, right? And he has this guy named Charlie Pierce on there, who I just thought was a beautifully eloquent writer. And they're like, yo, at the bottom of his joint, it says he writes sports for us, but he does politics for Esquire. So I say, oh, let me go check out his politics stuff. And I loved it. It was brilliant. It was like right around the time of Barry's second campaign, right? I'm like, wow, this guy is great. And then he blogs about this little show on MSNBC on the weekends called Up with Chris Hayes, where he's like, yo, it's not the same Sunday show, parade of gas bags. It's like real normal people on MSNBC talking about the politics that affect normal people on this guy's show on the weekends. Y'all should check it out. So I became a sort of acolyte of the Chris Hayes thing at MSNBC. Then, of course, Chris Hayes blows up. He gets his primetime show. And he has a guest on his show named Sam Seder, who on MSNBC is like a damn flamethrower, right? Like, Sam is a fire-breathing dragon in that setting. And it's like, well, he's the host of this YouTube show called The Majority Report. I'm like, all right, cool. Let me start watching this guy's YouTube show. And of course, I start loving it. And Mike is sort of your sidekick, chiming in every now and again. And, you know, at that time, he was doing Michael Mondays.
Yeah.
And to be honest with the audience, I was like, I'm not watching Michael Mondays. I'm like, I'm not watching Sam's Lackey on Sam's day off. I'm not watching that. Sorry. But one day I did watch Michael Monday.
Stop the story right there.
And so one day I did watch Michael Monday, and I was like, wow, this guy is freaking hilarious. He's brilliant. This is hilarious. And, you know, he told the joke that he's become very famous for, which is his Nation of Islam 5%er Barack Obama character that he invented. And I was just blown away by this because it was just so brilliantly thought out because, you know, and it says everything you need to know about Mike. It's like, some people know what Islam is. Some people know about the Nation of Islam and what they teach. Not a lot of people know about an offshoot of the Nation of Islam called the 5%er Nation, which is which was very prevalent in New York City, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the joke Mike was saying. He's like, these idiots on Fox think that Barry is this like hard, like he's the most milquetoast center person you could ever think of, but they treat him like he's literally like he's Farrakhan type of figure. And so the joke was just so brilliant to me because I was at the time I was thinking about the 5%ers a lot because like Jay-Z was running around New York City and like a bunch of 5%er like jewelry and all of this and whatever. So at the time I was obsessed with the topic of this like fringe quasi-religious group. And Mike makes a joke about it on the show. So I reached out to him on Twitter and I was like, that is one of the funniest things I've literally ever seen in my life. And at the time, you know, I had just gotten started in doing this sports media stuff, right? And so I was, you know, getting my little footing, amassing a little baby following, whatever. And Mike hit me up immediately and was like, yo, let's get together. Let's get a beer in Brooklyn one day. And so we did that and we were friends basically ever since. We hung out for like 2-3 hours at some little bar in like Clinton Hill, I believe it was. And we became friends ever since. We stayed in touch. We would always try to hang out as much as we could. He would have me on Majority Report, of course, TMBS, all kinds of stuff. And that's the story, Sam.
That's a good story. I didn't realize there's a lot of Worcester in that. I don't know if you realize that. Charlie Pierce has got a lot of Worcester family, and Simmons went to Holy Cross.
Yeah, big Massachusetts energy.
Yeah, Michael, of course, from Western Mass. I mean, it's not really
not Worcester, but
it's not really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're west of Fitchburg, forget it. But that's a great story. Yeah, I mean, he obviously. I mean, it's that really I think encapsulates a lot of like what Michael brings. I think a lot of people. I mean, that's the thing is that I think Michael would have really appreciated to see how important he was to so many different people that it's. I don't know that he had a full grasp of that, while he was alive. I don't think he could have really.
Well, Sam, you could speak to this, and everybody who's in our line of work can speak to this. Is that sometimes it feels like we're just speaking into the void.
Definitely.
It's like, is anybody even like listening to this? Like internalizing it? Like, does it even freaking matter? Like it can really feel like that all the time, right? Because you can't. However many people are listening to this or however many people
abstraction
podcast that I'm doing, there's no way for me to actually interact with them and be like, one by one, like, what do you get from this? How's it actually affecting you? Et cetera, et cetera. You just, I don't know. You do what you do and you hope that it's penetrating. Right. And so, of course, I'm sure that was Mike as well. Right. Like, we had a sort of remembrance for him here in LA with Leisha not too long ago. And I remember telling people, I was like, look, as successful as TMBS had become, I remember talking to Mike and him being like, yeah, but we're not Chapo Trap House yet. You know what I mean? It's like, as wildly successful as what he was doing was, it's always like, man, but am I doing enough? Are we big enough? Are we reaching enough people? Like, that's always, that's always been the feeling. But yeah, I don't know that if you got a sense of how many people he impacted. And like I said, again, I don't want to say completely oblivious to it. Cause like stuff like the live show that he did in LA, to see the response and the people and the crowd and the way that like the genuine appreciation for the work that he was doing. I was like, wow. I was like, Matt, you guys are still putting something pretty freaking neat together here. I love it. So you can get a little bit glimpse of it, but I didn't understand in the moment. It was only afterwards, just the outpouring of people reaching out and the support and people just being like, look, not that they were, they were listening to Hannity and reading Michelle Malkin before Mike, but like that they just weren't as connected to the core issues as they now had become because of consuming the work that Mike did. And I think that's just a testament to his understanding that you got to make people laugh, that you got to have an open heart and stop being so damn judgmental about people, and understanding that we're all humans. We all have frailties. Nobody's perfect. You know, your coalition ain't going to be perfectly, you know, moralistic and all of that stuff. But like, if we do it the right way, we can deliver great outcomes for a great deal of people. And I think that's what he put into his show. And I think that's what he put into his work, his emphasis on messaging, you know, and I'm not the first person to say this. I think on the left, we do have a messaging problem, right? Like we really do. Just like I'm watching the way they're weaponizing critical race theory right now. It's brilliant. Like that shit sounds scary. Like, is it science? It's race? Like, what is this? Like, it's so brilliant how they're freaking doing this. Like, we're not as good as that. Instead, we come up with abolish the police. And it's like, wait, the last thing we abolished was like slavery. Like, are we just gonna just completely get rid of the institution? The police are like one of the last popular institutions left in America. And what our messaging is, abolish it. Like, you know what I mean? I think Mike was just so much more in tune with how to reach people in a way that made sense to them than we often are on the left. I just really think that was his brilliance, man. He could reach people. He could touch people, disarm them, and get them to understand that, you know, most of us are in this thing together.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today, man.
Thank you for having me, guys. Bless you guys. Love you guys. Obviously, I appreciate the work that you guys are continuing to do. I know we all miss Mike. I love him. I just think, you know, the guy was so freaking impactful. All we could do was just continue to try to strive to do that, you know, reach out to people, keep an open mind, keep an open heart, and keep our heads down and keep doing the work.
All right, man. Thanks.
Later, y'all.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. All right, folks. I'm not going to have time for any calls. I'm sorry. I know we've had people hanging on for a long time, and you know, over the course of the week, there'll be more opportunity, and of course, really over the course of the show. You know, we're not going to stop talking about Michael, but I want to read some IMs. See if I can't get everybody get at least an IM in here. Josh from Tucson, rest in power. Michael Brooks, thank you to all. The Majority Report. My thoughts are with all of you. We miss you, Michael, says Carl. Melancholy, I am wants to tell you how Tom Hartman took down Doug on air. And the best part was hearing Michael laugh as he clearly was reading ahead in the IM. He just laughed and laughed. It was the best feeling knowing that I'd give him that morsel. When COVID started, Michael was on MR one day a week. I'd get really happy knowing that it would be a really funny show. When he died, I kept feeling so confused because I didn't get that last show I was looking forward to. Rest in power, Michael. Anthony from Baltimore. I started listening to MR the week Mac Lex started. It was Michael, Matt, and Kelly during that iteration of the show, and I remember thinking that I found this little weird politics YouTube show. Thought it was so effing funny and didn't understand why you guys weren't much more popular. Sam, you and Michael had a comedic dynamic that was and will always remain inimitable. I will miss his hilarious laughs, smart takes, and him mercilessly plowing my wife, Baba friggin' Bowie. Josh from Connecticut. I remember the day after Michael IM'd, after Michael died, that I IM'd. I had never met Michael in person, and I had felt like I lost a good friend and still feel that way. Rest in peace, brother. All in Detroit, rest in power, Michael. I'll forever be grateful, leading me away from the right. Between the 101, love you guys. Michael was such an inspiration to me. I did a lot of activism, was somehow hired by Bernie and worked for Gary Chambers. Not sure where or what I'd be doing, but I owe a lot of it to Michael and helping me vocalize my ideologies and things. I always felt he had just the most amazing way of making such brilliant things so simple and down to earth. Eric from Iowa, rest in power, Michael. I miss you and hope you're out there somewhere watching and laughing. Teacher Czech Republic, I've been a member since Occupy Wall Street and remember getting to know Michael live on your internet audio broadcast. It hurt so bad when I heard that show last summer. Thanks for so much fun and information. Michael is in my heart forever. Bob Dork, every few weeks I watch the clip from when the Jordan Peterson impersonator called in. Michael losing it, really making that clip a million times funnier than it already is. Slappy Tubbs, I'm yet another Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, Peterson convert to the left thanks to Michael. I just never heard anyone criticize Sam Harris. Shocked and surprised me. And then right after that, Harris interviewed Charles Murray, and I sprinted to MR as fast as I could. Michael became my moral compass over the years, and when he died, I cried all day at work and had to lie and say a good friend of mine died, but it was actually true. He became a close friend in my earbuds, and I feel like I still haven't recovered from his passing. Rest in power, Michael Brooks. Dan Arkey, keep Michael's clarity of purpose in your mind and keep his laughter forever in your heart. MJB forever, left his best. Love you all. Thank you, Dan Arkey. Judy Ruliani, Michael got home out in front of the Sam Harris bubble. I will always be indebted for him for that. Aaron is not cool. I came to MR for the clip show aspect on YouTube years ago while I was traveling. Initially, I didn't like clips featuring Michael because he added so much context before the clip he played. But eventually, I began looking for clips where there was no clips played because Michael would explain so much I hadn't considered with solidarity and deconstruction of systems. R.I.P. Michael. Billiam 12, thank you for Michael and Sam and crew for bringing me to the left. I know you hear this a lot, but you saved me from getting anywhere near right-wing morons. For about 3 months of my life, I thought Gavin McGinnis made sense. Trust me, I am horrified now, too. Thank you for all you do. Miss you lots, Michael. Chardonnay Socialist. I was just reading Against the Web on the subway and thinking how starkly I could hear Michael's voice in the printed words when I came upon this aside while he was recounting the Four Horsemen conversation. If you ever watch my shows, you can imagine my tone of voice as I read out that description. My eye roll as well, and I laughed like a crazy person. Miss you, Michael. Always will. Chablis is Chardonnay from the Chablis region of France. There you go. Sam McKee, I watch Michael's video on Ruben Marianne Williamson at least once a month. Everyone should revisit it. John Miller, Esquire, a great Michael bit was with Matt Leck playing the van drivers in Michael Cohen's fraud schemes. Don't burn this book. I first stumbled across Michael when I found a Sam Harris debunked video that you guys did a few years back. At the time, I was a big Harris fan, and Michael really rescued me from the dark side. Been an MR fan ever since and have been moving further and further left. His legacy lives on in the ideologies of all he has shaped. Rest in power, Michael. Apineva. Hey, Matt, what was your favorite thing about Michael, and why was it short Thursdays after super long Mondays through Wednesdays? Cedar Simp. I discovered your show after Michael's passing, but his content regarding Israel was key to me shifting more to the left regarding Israel-Palestinian issues, especially as a Jewish guy living within a community of unconditional pro-Israel supporters. Michael's clips and insights have helped me reconcile some of my more leftist views with that of the Palestinian struggle. Excellent. Animal Psyche, my favorite debate with Michael will be always one with Sargon. Truly admire how unrelentingly he held his feet to the fire the whole time. Something I struggle to do. Rest in power, Michael. Simple Socialist, rest in power, Michael. A truly hilarious, deeply knowledgeable, and impossibly kind-hearted individual. His laughs in the background honestly made every single video of you answering a phone call funny as hell. Not sure if anyone could fill his shows. I will miss him indefinitely. Really cool. Feels like I watched Michael grow up on this show and then with his own show. To me, he was just hitting his stride. Been watching Dan Arkey's Michael comedy playlist. Please tell everyone to find it and subscribe. Yes, it's fantastic. Is it okay to ask Leisha how her parents are doing? Sorry, we tweet out on her. I think they're doing as well as they can be doing at this point. John, much love to you all. Missing Michael and appreciating him widening my lens regarding international politics. Jim McCartney, Michael radicalized me and introduced me to the socialist left. I'm not spiritual, but I miss his openness to spirituality as part of the left project. Rest in power, Brooksy. Retcon, Michael was always honest about his experience of being poor as a child. It made me feel a lot of relief from the shame I felt from being poor as an adult. One of the only commenters who was honest about that. He was great. Rest in power. Left Leckening, I started listening to you guys when I was a sophomore in high school, and now I'm in my 5th year of college. Michael was a giant. I used to listen to Michael's segments about the Middle East over and over and take notes. One time, Michael told a story about him taking psychedelics while watching Oliver Stone's JFK and crawling to the TV to try and turn it off. Does Leisha have any insight about that story? Yeah, you'll have to ask her. Prairie Fire Kowalski, hey Sam and the Vig and the MR crew. I was hoping to call in today, but if you're reading this, it means I probably can't speak well after getting my wisdom teeth pulled. Seems fitting on the anniversary of Michael's passing. I needed to stimulate the pain in our hearts that I think everybody felt when they got the news. It's incredible how only knowing you guys' show for 2 years up to that point and getting to talk with Michael for a year and a half in 5-minute calls has had a profound impact on my political perspective. I can't help but think that the phrase "be kind to individuals and ruthless institutions" has impacted my worldview. Leftist poggers, rest in power. Blues Brother Brooks. All right, I'm only going to be able to read a couple more of these, folks. J3000, I remember Sam and Michael going on for several minutes impersonating Bloomberg, shitting on and canceling Howard Schultz, one of the best live MR moments ever. I never laughed so hard at political discourse. Keep on, MR crew. Emma's Lark, Michael's investigative work to uncover the truth behind Bernie Sanders' Maoist agenda was shocking. In all seriousness, Michael helped me shirk the stigma I associated with socialism as a utopian in my early teens by constantly presenting a more nuanced and historically based pragmatic approach. Rest in power. A couple more here. As Toka, I used to be in that right-wing bubble. I was a huge fan of Crowder and Shapiro. Michael started to draw me to the left by making me laugh and helped me make that shift permanent by teaching me all the history and policy I didn't know, and most importantly, showing me a kind, inspiring vision for the future. I miss him all the time, but glad I can keep learning from him through the footage that exists. He was truly one of a kind. Rest in power, Michael. Much love to you all. Winnipeg Craig. I used to jokingly bug Michael about covering Canadian politics more, particularly right after he had already covered it, but I really did admire his international and big picture approach. He managed to point to his audience to struggles in other parts of the world and get across their importance. I managed to get him a copy of Jagmeet Singh's book assigned to Michael. I was super appreciative that he weighed in and offered a bit of endorsement in that election. All right, 3 more, folks. I'm sorry I can't get to all of them. There's a lot here. Rampaging Toaster. When Michael died, I felt like I lost a giant. It inspired me to go back to school and study political science and law. I'll never have the charisma that he did. There'll never be another Michael Brooks, but all I can do is honor his memory to continue his mission in whatever way I can. Thank you all for continuing his work. Nick from PA, rest in power. Such a great person. Been listening to so many clips of him over this past year, missing his voice so much, especially hearing him on I-24 face off against Sam Nunberg. We'll do one more I just wanted to say, it's been a challenge to, move on with the show in many respects, and sort of always being conscious of a missing element. But you folks have been very, very supportive, and we've reshaped the show, and we're going to continue to do that. Emma's been a great addition, and the idea is that we're going to continue to grow and create and have both Michael's memory and his participation in the show, but also his message as a weather vane. And this is something that's been it's been nice to sort of have this moment.
And I just will say quickly, just to address that, right? Like, I knew, I was friends with Michael, not as close as a lot of, the people that called in. But I'm conscious every day of where I sit. I mean, impossible shoes to fill. So, I will never try to make myself be like him, but I always want to be more like him. And I just wanted to make that known, because I could never, fill his shoes. I know no one really could, but we're making the show something different, but with him always in, my heart and in my mind.
Your right-wing Mandela has gotten better.
Yeah, well, I've been workshopping it, right?
I don't know, guys. Do anybody else want to say?
No, I'll probably talk a little bit more on Wednesday on Left Reckoning. Griscom is also going to be doing a memorial stream this afternoon right after our show here. But Yeah, I mean, you know, I the only thing I think of is like completely changed my sense of time, like frustration with how time passes and how you view that. It's the biggest watermark in my life, or water. Is that the right word? Watershed. Yeah. And I feel a lot of the same things that I feel the week after today. So yeah, thanks for everybody for the support. It's been appreciated.
And, you know, Binder, I'm sure will have stuff to say on Thursday as well. Let me read one last IM. Michael would have already been telling me that it was time to wrap this up about 20 minutes ago.
That I can do.
Yeah.
That I can do.
Never would the real determination. There was really a sick pleasure I got in getting that libertarian call at 2:29. In the face, Michael just like sink into.
Michael takes his headphones out and walks into the other room.
So the final IM of the day, Jay Chivone. Something I loved was having Sam Seder read one of my more carefully crafted IMs and hearing Michael Brooks laugh across the room. Good one to end on. Guys, great job today. We will see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know.